All right, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to this office hours. Good to see the people here. And I already have some people in the comments. That's really wonderful. Let me get through a couple of business items and I'll jump to that question. I really like this question, though. Okay, so a couple of business items as far as like what's going on this week and last week and all that. First, let me jump to sharing this. You can see my channel page, of course. You may have already landed upon this, but I'm at the live tab, as you can see here. That's just, you probably land on the home page, click over the live. Here we are. This one I want, of course, we're in the office hours. You found this. We are here. This one I want everybody to go take a look at, 3 parts of morality. We just looked at this on Monday. So I invited the people who were at this one to perhaps come over to this office hours call-in show if they had any lingering questions or so on. And of course, there's always the comments, but this way you can do it live and everything and in person and ask me follow-up questions, things like that. So that's what it's here for. The one we're currently in, and this one I'm very excited about. I expect to attract a lot of people, not only because it's a pretty different thumbnail that'll get attention, but also anytime I do the trolley problem in class, it's always a hit, and we always have people. It's like one of those where nobody's asleep. People don't want to leave the classroom. They want to keep asking me questions. They want to keep asking other people questions. And so I just know that this is going to be a hit. That's going to generate a lot of interest. And this happens on Monday at 2 p.m. I'm kind of wary about that 2 p.m. time because, I know it's right in the middle of a workday, but not so for everybody in the world. So I'm thinking about maybe considering moving it to a later time, but maybe I will, actually. It might move from like 2 to 4:30 or something like that if it does. But in any case, let me know if you guys have thoughts about that. Okay, so we will jump over to the comments and questions. Okay, I already have really good questions. You guys are awesome. Okay, so first of all, I'll just say hello to everybody. Good to see people here and here. Hold on. Okay, good to see you, Daniel. Someone said to get out of here. Nah, Daniel's welcome. He's good. He's cool. And then hello to Sevens Patterns. Good to see you as well. And then we have Mary coming in even before the bell rings to ask a question. I like this. I like this a lot. So I did not recognize, I'll just be honest with you, I did not recognize these authors' names. And so I had to Google them and these titles, which I really appreciate you sharing. So let's just go one by one. I looked over at David Strauss, Life of Jesus, and this I'll give you kind of my thoughts on this as I'm learning this in real time, right? Strauss's Life of Jesus, you can see that he was a long time ago, 1835. It was a highly controversial work. He was a theologian, and he applied historical criticism to the New Testament Gospels, arguing that the miraculous elements of Jesus' life, such as the virgin birth and resurrection, were mythical and ahistorical rather than literal historical events. Okay, that's not surprising. Let's jump over here to see what Ernest Renan has to say. And you see something very similar. He's in the 1800s as well. And then right here, a very nice summary here by Google Books. It says, whoever wrote the summary, based on the life of Jesus should be written like the life of any historic person. The Bible could and should be subject to the same critical scrutiny as any historical document. And you could probably guess what the next one will also say. Walter Castle on supernatural religion, another 1800s guy, in which he challenged the credibility of miracles and validity of the New Testament. So all that to say, and just take these in order. They're all going to kind of form a collective group here, of course. This is probably why you asked this. I'm actually really impressed that you knew who these people were. I don't study theology, so I don't know, but I am aware of like main shifts and stuff. And I do know during the 1800s, it's when you start to get this historical critical method where they try to look, let's say, let me pull this back so you can see my own mannerisms here, and I'll even pull this down so you can see better. Okay, they look at the text in allegedly the most unbiased way that they can possibly look into it. But this is never unbiased. In my work, I've realized you can never be unbiased, and that's why I tell people, look, I'm biased, but I'm fair. So I think it's really helpful when you are making those biases very clear, because they're present. They're just not always explicit. So they have real biases there, obviously. Now, I'm not saying it's anti-religious bias, although I do think that's present. I mean a philosophical bias, right? So if they're examining historical documents, and atheists do this today, they are examining the documents in the New Testament books and so on, maybe even the Old Testament, in terms of already presupposing that miracles don't exist, that the supernatural is not real, then that is a philosophical presupposition that needs to be argued for. You don't get that for free. That is a claim about reality, that reality is a certain way, namely that the supernatural doesn't exist, that only the natural world exists. This is a philosophical position, of course, called naturalism. And so, yeah, and this is what is driving these authors, right? We know exactly what we can expect from authors like this, that they're going to arrive at the conclusions. But in this case, the conclusions that they're arriving at are the ones that they already started with, right? They're only going to read the New Testament documents as if miracles don't exist, and so on and so on. So you're not going to get, I mean, it's hard to evaluate this fairly, but as a Christian, I believe in supernatural. But as a philosopher, I'm convinced that naturalism is just not true, right? There are really good reasons against philosophical, not religious, philosophical reasons against naturalism and materialism and physicalism, all these related kind of group of ideas. And so, on those grounds, and given my own worldview, like, I'm just not going to take what these authors say seriously. And it's pretty obvious that they're arriving at a conclusion that they have already predetermined is going to be that conclusion. So I'm just going to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I might read it, let's say, to critique it. I might read it, let's say, for like historical value, like, what were German naturalistic theologians doing in the 1800s? Like, if I wanted to explore that area. But as for like, hey, this is real and we should really take this scholarship seriously, I wouldn't read it for that. All right, let's see about some other comments here before we jump in. Right here. Oh. How does Derek feel about some Orthodox Christians saying unless you're part of the Eastern Orthodox then you aren't saved? Now, I've not heard this from Eastern Orthodox. And I'm not sure what the actual Orthodox position is, to be honest with you. I can tell you that I would guess the Orthodox position parallels the Catholic position on this, that they're, in other words, very ecumenical and fair and open to some Christians, not all, but some. I think that I know this about Catholics, that they recognize the validity of Eastern sacraments, such as, not all of them, but especially the most important one, the Eucharist. They recognize that as being absolutely valid, and they recognize the Eastern Orthodox as being having apostolic succession. Now, I don't know if that's reciprocal. I don't know if Eastern Orthodox would recognize that. That's a question for them. I should probably know that answer, but but I imagine it would probably be something very similar to what Catholics think because of the similar historical rootedness that both Christian groups have. But I like, with respect to this question, I would wonder whether this is a real teaching of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Then again, with respect to teachings of the Orthodox Church, it depends on what Orthodox Church you're talking about. There's the Greek, there's the Ukrainian, there's the Russian, so on and so forth. And they even have like Greek, Eastern, Greek, Eastern, Belarusian. It's like all these combinations, and they're like regionally associated. So it really depends on kind of what Orthodox Church you're talking about. As for like the official position, now I don't doubt that there are some Orthodox Christians, as you've worded it here, saying this, but I just wouldn't know how to respond to that. I would probably ask them, well, where does it say that in your official documents and constitutions and statements of faith, your actual dogma and doctrine? And if it doesn't, then that's just a problem that they're not being consistent with their own teachings. And I would just, say, I'm just going to go by what your church officially teaches. Yeah. And I don't think it's this. But I could be wrong about that. All right, let's keep going. Hello. Okay, we have a follow-up question here. Starting with naturalism, to how would one evaluate miracles using only historical methods? Yeah, this is interesting. So here's the thing with sciences, and somebody mentioned, yeah, this is what you said yourself up here on Card Block. The until 1950s historians were far less trustworthy. Well, I think this is so. As you see the sciences develop, and by sciences I mean all the disciplines in a university. Like science in Latin, the word scientia translates to science, but it also just translates strictly to knowledge. So this is why we say the sciences, we just mean the bodies of knowledge. So all the sciences, not just the hard sciences. We realize, like, collectively in academia and learning and scholarship, that we realize, wow, these physical sciences, these hard sciences are being really, really successful. And so let's mirror that method that they're using, and we might have a better success at getting at what's true in the world. This was like common thinking among positivism, logical positivism, the early 20th century, secular humanism, and so on, even before that. So that's what they did. They try to mirror these new, in some cases new, like archaeology, psychology, in some cases old disciplines like history, but they started to mirror all these other bodies of knowledge after the hard sciences. Well, what do you mean mirror their method? Well, the hard sciences, again, it presupposes methodological naturalism. Like, I proceed as if the world is a closed causal system, and that only the natural world is all I'm caring about right here for the purposes of my observation. Like when I do my chemistry experiments in my lab, I'm not presupposing divine intervention or that angels are coming around and messing with the chemicals in the vials or something. I'm just presupposing that everything is a closed system, right? And so that's exactly the method that got adopted in these other sciences. That's why you see, like, you're asking using only historical methods. The problem with using only historical, scare quote, historical methods, or what are taken to be properly historical methods, is that they are so permeated with this naturalistic thinking that really they're untrustworthy in and of themselves, because they all, insofar as they follow that historical method of naturalistic thinking, they all are, again, like I said earlier, presupposing that philosophical position that you need to argue for. Like, I mean, ideally, the philosophy, this is my take, like philosophy would be more foundational in the university and within academia, and kind of centering among all these sciences, such that, like, we can settle that question of naturalism versus, supernaturalism or what have you, right? Whether naturalism is true or whether there are supernatural beings like God, right? And let's settle that issue, or at least proceed that way. And maybe in order to be ecumenical and fair among the disciplines, you should say, okay, the one historical method is proceeding naturalistically, and another historical method is proceeding as if, I don't know, maybe miracles do happen, right? I think that would be much more fair. And I think that'd be much more intellectually honest, to be quite frank with you. So yeah, and so that kind of answers this question. How would I evaluate miracle claims? If that was a viable historical method, which I think absolutely it is, because it's philosophically defensible, then you go into history thinking, okay, this could have been, this miracle claim could have actually been true, right? I don't need to sweep it under the rug or explain it away as being figments of people's imaginations, and they just reported it as kind of what they thought it was. No. Like, this might actually be true, and let's actually evaluate it on philosophical grounds or like rational grounds, something like that. Not just assume that, oh, they've got to be lying about something. So that's a good question. Okay, good. Nice. Okay, cool. So the question I posed was actually for my brother. His library is tremendous. He's read those books, not me. He's atheist, probably naturalist. Obviously, I'm Catholic. Yeah, and I thought you were. Yeah. So nice. Yeah, and bring me your questions from other people. Invite people on too. If you want. Anytime I'm online, like I'm on my other socials like Instagram or X or Threads or TikTok, I'm always like reaching out, inviting people. I don't know if there's ever been anybody who's been like, sure, I'll take. Actually, one guy, Ben, whose screen name is like something like the friendly atheist or something, not so angry atheist. He was great. He came on. We had a wonderful chat, and yeah. But I do this all the time. Most people won't jump on, and that's fine. I've even done it in person. Um, and my son currently is in catechism at our church, at our parish. He's in catechism to take the sacrament of confirmation, and meeting with the other parents there. One parent was actually a grandparent, and she's like, "Yeah, all my kids, I have 3 kids. 2 of them are fully Catholic. One of them I raised Catholic, but isn't Christian anymore. And he's just kind of fallen off. He doesn't really believe any of it." And I was like, "Send him to me, please. Like I would like to talk to him, whether it be on here or whether it be over the phone, whether it be through email, what have you." And we kind of stayed in touch. I haven't gotten to talk to him personally, but she sent me some of his questions like you're doing here. And I absolutely welcome that, because like to whatever degree I can help spread the truth. And I'm very happy to do that. So yeah. Yeah, bring him on if you want. You can invite him. Not everybody's going to say yes or whatever, but yeah, it's very helpful sometimes. So, all right. All right. My thoughts, I suppose you're asking me this, your thoughts on distinct acrostic chapters and hidden mathematical structure. Yeah, so here's my thoughts on this. I think it's possible, right? And what you mean about this, there are things like the so-called, let's pull this up for helpful purposes here. I'm gonna start a new tab here. I will look up something like there was this really popular book called The Bible Code, and it's, of course, most people are very critical of it. They think it's pseudoscientific, suggesting hidden messages, prophecies, predictions of future events, so on and so on and so on, right? And they have methods that they use, right? This is popularized by this book. It's kind of the central, I don't know if it's the seminal work in this area, but it certainly was very popular enough to be remembered. And it's like a title is very succinct, probably bestseller in some sense. But yeah, so that's the idea behind it. Do I think that it's possible? Absolutely. I think it's possible. I think that there are hidden codes in scripture. Sure. Fine. Yeah, that's fine. Now, the problem with this, though, is that those numbers of chapters and verses weren't added in until like centuries later by later editors and monks and commentators on scripture. And you also have the problem of interpolations, like at the end of the Gospel of Mark, that in some ancient documents, the end of the last, like, I don't know, what is it, like 6 verses or so might be. The last 6 verses, let's say, is missing. In some ancient documents, it's present. So you have that problem. It's like, okay, well, which one do we go with? So if you're trying to do like a number sequence theory on this, that's a huge problem, because it doesn't seem like the numbers, well, not just it doesn't seem, we know that the numbers weren't added in there when it was being written. And we know that the text itself is divinely inspired. But the numbers and the sequencing is all that, like, that this code essentially relies upon. That is not divinely inspired. Like, no theologian thinks that the numbers themselves are divinely inspired. Now, of course, like what I said, I mean, I think it's possible. Sure, it's possible, but I think you have some serious critical problems here that would critically damage the plausibility of such a view. And not only that, but also from pragmatic perspective, like people can find patterns in anything, right? So they can. I don't know if you've seen this. Maybe I can try to show it again. Maybe I can find it. I'm sure you've seen this before, and if you haven't, this might blow your mind. So the JFK and Abraham Lincoln similarities. All right. There's an urban legend here. So this might not even be true, right? And there's a whole thread about misconceptions, but let's look at a few. All right. That's not a very interesting one. Okay, so here we'll go with the urban legend right here. Aha! Lincoln and Kennedy both have 7 letters. They were both elected to Congress in 46, a century apart, to the presidency in 60, a century apart. Both assassins were born in 39 and were known by their 3 names composed of 15 letters. All 3 names composed 15 letters. So this is getting at, in other words, this sort of like interesting. Get out of here, dude. I'm sorry about this. Yeah. This is getting into that number theory again. Like, these have 7 letters. What could that mean? This has 15 letters. What could that mean? So on and so forth. And all these other really interesting coincidences that some people are thinking, well, they might not be coincidences. They might be intentional, or there might be some over. I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to take away from that, but people raise these things as like really, really kind of curious coincidences, right? And of course, though, you can, let's see if this article has any of this. You can take this, obviously some of these are just going to be inaccurate at all and false, but let's see. Some of them, this has been satirized, made into a satire. I've never jumped upon this actual Wikipedia page. So I'm not even sure what it's going to say. This is like, yeah, okay, it just explained away by random. Okay, yeah. But I've seen it satirized in the sense of like, some people will be like, oh yeah, Marilyn Monroe has 6 letters in her last name, and so does, I don't know, Billie Eilish, and so they're both singers. Look at that, and like you're supposed to draw some interesting conclusion from this, and it's like you could do this with just about anything. And if that's what's driving your theory, then that's not a very good epistemic base. It's not a very good epistemically sound approach to reality, because you're going to see coincidences everywhere. And so, if you do this with scripture, I mean, it's just about making random connections and so on. Now, let me get a couple other things here. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Mary, I'm glad that you invited him. Good. Yeah, we'll see if he comes on. Cool. Now, speaking of conspiracy theories, we have someone on here, Daniel, who is now going to come on here, and I would imagine probably want to talk about this. Tell me if I'm wrong, Daniel. Did I perk your ears up by talking about conspiracy theories here?
No, I'm not. I mean, I
Oh,
definitely
okay.
have had to deal with
Because
that
you've had
stuff
your
in my
fair share
conversation.
of this. I know. Yeah.
I have,
Debates on
yeah,
this
and
and
I do
stuff.
think
Yeah.
I have had debates on this. In fact, I've got a debate. I finally got someone who's willing to debate me on the flood myth, and that always comes down to conspiracy theories against science and stuff, and all the conversations I've had. So I'm really excited. I've had an open challenge out for anybody to debate me on the flood myth, and nobody has stepped up. All my debates have been about biblical morality, which I'm just getting tired of doing. It's too easy in my opinion. But so it's going to be interesting. I'm really excited. This weekend's going to be a fun one.
Cool.
I really
Yeah.
wanted to talk about morality because I watched your show, really enjoyed it
Okay.
last week, and you guys were talking about morality, and that's right up my
We
field.
were.
But I just wasn't available. But you did pique my interest with this naturalism, so I'm going to try and use the best of my time. But I always like
Cool.
to start by asking how you and your family are doing. Everyone's in good health,
Oh,
that kind of
well.
thing.
We're great. Nothing's changed since last week. And let me just pause this while I wax a little bit. Um, we had a beautiful dinner last night with one of our priests at our parish, Father Jose Maria. He's originally from Venezuela. He grew up in Long Island, went to Notre Dame. He's just a great guy. Great guy. Big, gregarious, wonderful, fun, joyful guy. And it was great catching up with him as a friend. And then, other than that, tomorrow we're going to see Jim Gaffigan because we got free tickets. That's cool. But other than that, like, it's just same old, same old. Yeah. How have you been?
I've been very good, brother. I appreciate my health's getting better every day. I'm back in the gym. I'm back to work. So
Good.
life is starting to kind of, look a lot more normal. And, when you've been ill for as long as I was and stuck on the couch, I'm so glad to be even back to work. Everybody around me is like, God, it sucks. We're here. We got to punch the clock. And I'm just like, yeah, this is great, man. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go
Yeah.
hit it.
It's
So
so much
perspective
we
is
take for
everything, right?
granted. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. No, you're right. So I just, before I get into morality, I wanted to ask you, because I'm a
Of
naturalist and I
course.
just want to make sure that we're all using these terms correctly. That so materialism and naturalism, well, they do cross over in a lot of ways. They're really two
Hmm.
distinct categories. Is
That's
that
true.
correct?
That's true.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. So
Well,
you
distinct in the
could
sense that
you
they're not identical. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, right, exactly. Okay, yeah. So basically, I believe in transcendental properties or transcendental phenomenon, and I
Hmm.
think materialists don't. I think it's one of the distinctions. Uh, and we don't have time to get into like the combination problem or the hard problem of consciousness and stuff. But I think those conversations are fascinating. But
Yeah.
could you give me in just like a really succinct 1 or 2 minutes? You said that in philosophy there have been really good arguments against naturalism.
Yes.
Where would I look into that? Which philosophers,
See if I
perhaps, and
have
what's the
my.
basic of the argument?
Let's see if I have my actual book here. I've got two books. Give me one sec. Usually right out here. And that's actually pretty rare that I go right to the bookshelf and find them. But these are always ones that I like to reference, and you probably have seen me reference them before. This is The Waning of Materialism here. I like this because it's a volume with like 24 different articles, so it's an anthology, but it's a new anthology. Like they wrote this for the purpose of this volume. And I have a couple of, like, if you pull this up, I don't know what the price is now. It's been out for about 15 years. So it is Oxford University Press. So it'll be pricey, but being out 15 years, it may have dropped. And I like a couple of these. I like chapter 2 from Adam Potts, and I like chapter 7 from David Barnett. Excuse me. Adam Potts' article is on the simple view of consciousness, and then David Barnett is an article on called "You Are Simple," but these are two different approaches. Like one, Barnett is on the idea of unity and identity of substances, and Adam Potts is on an argument from consciousness itself that it has to be simple and unified, and so not about substances but about consciousness. And then speaking of consciousness, this is the substance of consciousness. It's Wiley Blackwell. It's only been out for a couple of years, so it might still be a little pricey, but I highly, highly recommend this. It's by my friend Brandon Rickaball, my colleague there, and JP Moreland, who is a former professor of mine. They're both really brilliant and really clear writers, and it's very meticulous. I mean, gosh, just look at the chapter breakdown there. Like chapter 1 is about, it gives you a whole historical breakdown of this whole conversation and discussion around the arguments of consciousness, right? From a historical perspective, like what worked, what didn't, what are the themes, what are the trends and tendencies of philosophers to go after this or that question. And so that's extremely, extremely helpful. Even if you didn't care about any other arguments in the book, for that alone, I think it's worth buying. But I think that their arguments are really good. They have several arguments. I don't know if I'd count them, but I want to say at least six, maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen arguments for consciousness, and that consciousness can't be material, right? Because they're not materialists. Both of them, I believe, unless they've changed their view on this, I think they both would admit to being substance dualists, but they are not Cartesian substance dualists. So that's a bit, again, like if you need that terminology, just go to the history books, the history portion of that, and they'll like explain, like, here's what's Cartesian dualism. This is why we're not that. We are still substance dualists. This is why. And so, yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful distinctions. Yeah. So good book
Yeah, I'm
that.
familiar
I'm
with
not
the
sure
terms.
which
That's
one you.
the Cartesian model. Yeah, I'm
Good,
familiar with
good.
that. I think if I remember right, it was Descartes. The Cartesian model traces back to Descartes, or he was.
Right.
I think that his the cogito ergo sum was ultimately in relation to that, and dualism versus non-dualism, and those are interesting. I think from Plotinus and the Neoplatonic, the one, and through Spinoza's substantive monism. I think these are fascinating philosophical ideas. You see it in theology with Taoism, for example. But
Yeah.
so yeah, these ideas that we're all connected, this universal consciousness. This is really there's actually a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a large movement within the atheistic community towards panpsychism. for example.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's just kind of interesting how these ideas are starting to kind of cross over. But
Yeah.
I digress. So the consciousness, I'm conscious of Jesus. The morality situation, as you know, I do believe in objective ethics and objective morality as an
Yeah.
agnostic. And I heard you have some interesting conversations last week with some people regarding that. And I actually just had a conversation. There's a young lady who runs with Turning Point USA who used to be affiliated with
Hmm.
Charlie Kirk. She runs a channel called her name is Gothics with an X, and
Okay.
she. I don't know if you are familiar with a gentleman named Brooklyn Lou. He's a friend of mine. He's an atheist who
Yeah,
puts out
he's
content.
been on the
A
channel.
smaller
Yeah, he's
channel.
called in a couple times.
Oh, he
Yeah.
has. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. I really
Really
like
great
Lou.
guy. Yeah.
Uh, he's just absolute sweetheart. You could just tell
He's
some
great.
people in real life. I'm sure he'd be an absolute peach.
Yep.
But he kind of got ran over the coals. He went on the Gothic's channel and he kind of got ran over the coals, like most
Mm.
people who are running or believing. And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but I think these subjective morality claim is just so untenable for so many reasons. I
Yeah.
had a debate
Yeah.
recently against an atheist friend of mine, and he believes in subjective morality, and I obviously took the opposite position, even though we're both
Yeah.
skeptics. And AI judged the debate afterwards, and essentially AI exposed the same fact that I exposed in the debate, which is that with subjective morality, you take on such a massive burden of proof because each claim
Mm.
is a positive claim essentially. So each claim inherits a certain or incurs a certain burden of proof, obviously, and subjective morality just has such a large hill to climb when it comes to what we actually see in the world, how to bridge certain gaps. Subjective morality just doesn't bridge a number of different gaps between objective truths and stuff like that. So to me it seems like the most obvious answer. But so I went on to Gothic's channel and was able to get her to basically agree that even though I don't believe in any gods and she is a Christian, that we both can agree that there is an inherent quality, an inherent value that all human beings have. Then that's our common ground. That's our starting point. That's where the objective
Yeah.
morality comes. Starts there. She can attribute that to a god, and I don't discredit anybody who wants to do that.
Yeah.
But I believe that it's really tied to nature. And of course, again, if you're a creationist, you're going to ultimately kick that can down the road to God at some point. But the common ground, I think, between non-believers or skeptics like myself and the theists is that we can start with that basic premise that all people have at this inherent value. We all share agency. We all have an equal right
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
well-being.
Yeah.
That's really how I've been running the argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, a couple of comments here, just not having watched that interaction. Yeah. So I don't know how she was presenting things, but not surprising that you would have somebody say, "Yeah, this is great common ground," because that's true. That's true. It's nice to recognize something that's true. There is common ground. But I see that as just a datum, like it's a datum that we have objective morality. Like, and then the further question, like that agreement between you is just that here's a datum, there is objective morality. You said that too. Okay, great, cool. And now it needs to be explained. Like, what is it? And that's where the worldviews diverge. Of course, you said that the Christians will kick the can down the road, but frankly, I don't know if the naturalist or let's say the skeptic or atheist, whatever have you, kicks the can down far enough. If if you want to leave it in those words, because the question is like, okay, you want to ground it in nature, that human nature is just a certain way, perhaps, but why would nature be like that? Why should nature be like that? And isn't just arbitrary that nature is just this certain way as opposed to a different certain way? I mean, if we grew up to such that violence was actually, I don't know, evolutionarily successful and helpful towards one another, which in some cases that would be really plausible, right? Then that would be morally bad, in this world, but in a possible world it could be very something morally good. And so why shouldn't human nature be that other way instead of this way? And then if it's just arbitrary, whichever way it is, it's just like, I don't know if the atheist or skeptic or an agnostic really can give a more defensible grounding behind just, oh, it's just in human nature. I mean, that's nice to start there, and I agree with you. It is grounded in human nature, but I think that's also an incomplete answer. It needs further explanation.
Yeah, I think those are great points, all of them. And the one thing you probably already know this is you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit, but
Hmm.
I put a lot of effort into having polite, civil, and hopefully somewhat
Yeah, you do.
intellectual conversations with people on the other side of the aisle. And so, one of the techniques that I found to be very successful in my interactions with people is to really try to push the conversation as far back as we can
Hmm.
while finding common ground, to find that least common denominator that we both share. And then we
Yep.
can work either backwards or forwards from there. Because a lot of times, arguments are not necessarily linear. Your argument can be at origin, or maybe you might have a disconnect somewhere much further down the road from origin. And so to be able to sort that all out, it's, I think, finding that common denominator. One, it shows respect. It shows that
Yes.
you're really
Yeah.
looking to if to find something of value in the other person's thoughts, and also to have your own thoughts be valued. And so I think that that's a great way to approach these conversations, and you can work backwards or forwards from that common ground, in my opinion. So I really put a lot of effort into that, and I found
Absolutely.
that to be
Yeah.
very helpful,
Yeah.
just for
Yeah.
anybody out in the comments who might watch this
Yeah.
video. It is a very
Of
successful
course. Yeah.
disarming technique.
It is. It's a helpful way forward, and I'm really pleased to see. Like, I applaud you for that. I'm glad that you do that. I try to do that as well, and it's really I'm very pleased to see that many creators, maybe not many, just a few creators now on YouTube, where it could be such just a toxic wasteland, hurt and anger and being mean with each other, that they are now starting to see this is not a very productive way forward. And if I want to try to convince somebody, I've actually got to try to think like them, and also affirm the things that they get right, and that takes a lot of practice. Like, I'm not
Oh yeah.
perfect at it either. Like, you want to immediately like defend yourself, or maybe as a heady intellectual, you want to be like, oh, I want to point out what was wrong with that thing. But like, it takes skill and practice to say, okay, I need to pause for a second and realize, okay, what you said is actually right, and here's like a creative way to go forward without like losing my audience and just making an enemy of whoever I'm talking with.
Well, this is a really important thing because I was talking to Gothic. She's actually got a fairly large platform, as you can imagine, being involved with Charlie Kirk and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The turning point situation. So when I was talking to her, their comment section, they were actually being quite kind. But there
Good.
were a lot of people trying to figure out, how am I coming up with this objective morality from
Of
being an
course. Yeah.
agnostic and stuff. And my argument is very deep and philosophical. In fact, one of the things that I got dinged for in the debate with AI is that my argument was so philosophical that it can come across as
Mm,
almost elitist, that it might go over people's
yeah.
heads. And I take that as a criticism, and as a valuable criticism, but it's almost a
Right. Yeah.
compliment too. It just means that I'm
Yeah.
thinking very deeply about things. But as
Yeah.
far as that goes, I one of the things, so people in the chat were like, well, how do you know that you're a good person without God? How do you actually know? And I I ultimately, to me, being a good person is about virtue and virtue ethics, and all about
Hmm.
all of that, and I do
Yeah.
ground it all in logic.
Yeah.
Subjective morality leads to logical contradictions, and so therefore the only alternative
Yeah.
left on the table is objective morality. But to simplify it for people, so it's not, so they're like, what the heck are what's virtue ethics and all this other stuff, um, is I have basically three principles that I think anyone can understand. The first thing
Hmm.
is are you aware and actively engaging in the reality that you could always be better? No matter how good you think you are as a human being, you always can improve. That's step number one. Step
Hmm.
number two is, are you willing to work hard for the things that you want in life? And then the
Hmm.
third step, and I think the most important step, is, um, how do you balance your desire to be right with your empathy for other people? And I
Yeah.
think if you just start at that starting point, it's really dumbed down as much as I can dumb it down without getting into the whole virtue and the golden mean and all this other stuff, natural law, and all these more deep
Yeah.
philosophical concepts. If you could just
Yeah.
boil it down to those three talking points, I think anybody should be able to wrestle with those things. And it draws us towards humility.
Yeah.
It focuses on the value of hard work, and then empathy versus being right, the ego problem, and so those are just really great starting points for anybody, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really wonderful strategy. Let me ask you a question. Um, if you were a theist, would you have any problem with God grounding morality?
I see that as, well, so It depends on what kind of theism you're talking about. So as an
The
agnostic,
Christian
I'm not
theism.
a yeah, I do not see. I've had several debates about biblical morality, and I'm not here to dunk on you guys or your show, your
Hmm.
religion, or whatever, but this is completely dysfunctional. It's the most immoral thing imaginable. When you really get into the Old Testament and the
Yeah.
epistemology of
Yeah.
of Jesus and everything,
Okay.
and I've heard the arguments run both ways, and again, I don't want to be disrespectful to you or your
Okay.
community. I just
Let's not get
personally,
into the Bible then. I mean, that could be for another
yeah,
time you call in, and I'm
sure,
happy
sure,
to talk about that. Let's just think about the classical theistic God of the philosophers, agreed upon by
yeah,
Islam, by
yeah, the unmoved,
Christianity.
like the unmoved
Yeah,
mover, like Aristotelian.
it has
Yeah,
the
yeah.
classical attributes: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, but also omnibenevolence. Right? Would you have any problems of God grounding morality if you were a theist, like of that stripe? Would there
So
be
the
any
way
like
that I see
logical
it,
problems or anything like that?
no, I don't think so. I think the way that I see it is
Okay.
that if there was a God, it would be this unmoved, this Aristotelian kind of unmoved mover, kind of a concept, maximally great being,
So
perhaps,
hold on. Let me say then. So your reason for thinking God doesn't ground morality is not because it's like logically incoherent. It's because you're not a theist. And if you were a theist, you would agree that God grounds morality. So really, the question for you as to whether God grounds morality is whether God exists. Of course, you don't
Well,
think He
to a
does.
degree, because to me, the concept is this deistic concept where basically, if there is a God or a creator, so to
Hmm.
speak, then that would technically be the God of everything. Very much like what Spinoza talked
Yeah.
about, the God or nature,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so I do think that to me would make the most sense as far as a God character or
Yeah.
God. I don't think character is a fair word, but you know what I'm saying,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
concept. But when I see these anthropomorphized gods that the religions talk about, then obviously you can break those arguments apart and say, well, wait a minute, this God shares the same fallible traits that people happen to share, and I don't think that's a coincidence, God. But as far as a
Well.
just generic God claim, if God created the laws of physics, that would all be grounded in God. And I believe that natural law and ethics and morality, the value of
Yeah.
human beings, that's all part of nature. So of course it would all end up being grounded. Everything would be grounded in this God at that
Yeah.
point. You can't parse out
So
one
really,
thing and
the
not the other.
the more fundamental question then for you is not whether you can ground morality without God, is whether God exists.
Yeah, and then again, it would have to be what kind of God are we talking about? Because you and I
Sure.
are talking about
Yeah.
a very specific God, but when it starts talking about benevolence, I'm not entirely sure that a
Well, again, he's
God
supposed to
that
ground
creates
morality.
things
So if
needs
he's
to
grounding
be.
morality, he would presumably be the best exemplar of that morality and be
I mean,
highly good, all
that's
good,
not
right? So
illogical.
that's, yeah,
That's not
yeah,
illogical to. No, I don't
yeah.
think that's illogical, but there's no logical reason why certain um, properties can't pop up naturally as a result of an action, as a consequence, perhaps maybe even
Right. But
an
I think
unintended consequence.
I totally agree that I can see benevolence and goodness and so on in creation. Like I don't dispute that whatsoever, apart from God. And I'm not even thinking about God. If I presume naturalism, I can see those things, sure. But that doesn't disprove that God exists. Uh,
No, no,
that's consistent with the idea that God exists. You know what I mean? Like, so really, like
sure,
the
no,
more
I don't
fundamental
think
question is
logically.
whether God exists.
Yeah, I don't think there's a logical problem with a lot of the God concepts. I think there's logical
Yeah.
problems with the formal philosophical arguments. As far as I'm concerned, I think there's a lot of gaps in each argument once you break them
Mm-hmm.
down. But which is why I'm agnostic. I think that
Mm-hmm.
the part of agnosticism a lot of people miss is that not only do I neither believe nor disbelieve, I don't think it's possible to know, because the
Mm.
God concept that that would make the most sense to me
Yeah.
lives in a supernatural state, and so that's unattainable to us. It's just once you
What?
bring a God concept into the world where you're starting to do miracles we talked about, and
I
that's
get.
something you can test. But
I
if
can.
it's
I,
untestable,
yeah.
unfalsifiable, you know,
So I can respect that to a degree, that God is unknowable in principle. I don't agree with it, but I can respect that because of his utter otherness, and transcendence. Um, I think that there are elements of God that are aspects of God, evidence of God that are knowable, of course. Um, but if you press this too far, you might say, well, if that's unknowable, then why would I think that like ethical or moral principles or knowable. Like if they're again supposed to be like this real, in some cases, high abstract conceptual ephemeral things, and yet I'm supposed to have access to those. They're not just like
Well,
my
I think that
observations. I of course have access to my observations, but like I'm talking about the moral principles. Like how do
sure.
I access those and know with certainty that they're real and they're right and they are true. If I've
Well,
already said that I can't
well,
know that about God, so it just seems, in some sense, you could say, well, God is going to be completely utter and transcendent, and like that's what I'm saying. Like I respect that, but yeah. Anyway, I'll give you the last word. We're out of time here.
yeah, for sure. And as far as the trolley problem goes, both answers are immoral. So you can't. There's a no-win situation. It's a true
Yeah.
dichotomy.
Well,
There,
good. Well,
as far as being unknowable, I don't think there is such a thing as absolute certainty, and I don't
no,
take
I
that to
don't.
mean there's no such thing as absolute truth or reality. But I don't think we
Yeah,
ever attain that ourselves. There's just too many subjective variables there and
yeah,
imperfections in the human mind. So
yeah,
I don't think that searching for that is great, but expecting to attain that is just
yeah.
untenable as far as that goes. And I do ground it in logic. The moral objective moral claims are actually grounded in logic, so you can use a logical argument. I look at evolution and natural states of things as evidence, but the actual argument that I run is through logic, through agency,
Sure.
these types of things that
Good.
logical contradictions can't exist. So using formal logic, that's how I argue for objective morality.
Yeah. 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 Good. Well, I'm glad that you were here, and please come back. We can talk about these other things next time you're on.
Absolutely. Great to
All right.
see you as always, brother.
All right. Great
I'll
to
be in
see
the
you too.
chat.
All right. See ya. Bye. All right. Good. Yeah. Just the final thing there before I bring Slug on, and we got like 3 people in studio, which is great. So it's going to be a little bit of a wait, but hang tight. Yeah. What you said there last, but I wanted to let you go soon, is that just occurred to me and remembered that might have just lost it. Oh yeah, you were saying you use logic, reason, and so on. That's also consistent with Christians. They also use logic, reason, and so on. That's something they believe in as well. So it's not exclusive to using a naturalistic perspective. But anyway, you probably already concede that as well. But just something I'll point out. All right, so we're gonna bring in Slugzilla here. Good to see you and welcome.
Hey, how's it
Uh,
going? Can you hear me just
Very
fine?
good. Yeah. How are you? You had your
Perfect.
camera on earlier. Do you mind sharing it with us, or
Yeah, if you
that's
guys
fine if
are
you want to
okay
leave
with
it on?
that, that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How's it going?
Well, I don't know if I met you before. Have I? I don't know if you've called in yet, but I think
I've
I
been
have seen you
playing
around.
around in the comments
Yeah,
and
I've
a
seen you
couple
around.
of YouTube videos, but nothing too crazy. No, I
Cool,
haven't been
cool.
directly involved. So
Well, good to finally meet you face to face. And
yeah, you
what do
too,
you want to
man.
talk
I
about?
love your content. I think you're a little underrated. I'm kind of surprised. It's high quality, very pragmatic, so I enjoy it
Well,
quite a bit.
appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I try to keep it as accessible as possible without going overboard, but also like I also try to keep the a good spirit about things and not just
Oh,
like given to the rabble and just
oh, for
the
sure.
the thing the algorithm loves, is like people always hating on each other, and it's like I'm not going to do that, so it may not blow up, but it may. Who knows?
Well,
I'm just
I
going to
think a
keep doing
lot of
what I do.
people think that debate is a matter of argument, and those are two very different things.
Yeah,
And I think at the point where a debate becomes an argument, I'm the type of person where I walk away,
yeah,
and some
yeah,
people become offended by it, and I don't keep a lot of friends around because of it, but at the
yeah,
end of the day, it's like I'm not looking to get aggressive. I'm just looking to
yeah.
learn and
Good,
become a better person. You know what I'm saying?
awesome. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're in the right place.
Awesome. Hey, so I kind of wanted to talk about some real weird topics. So you'll have to kind of entertain me. I've been reading a lot of Sabina Hoffensfelder's work, like Lost in
hmm
Math,
hmm
and some of these deeper concepts that kind of talk about the difference between essentially logic and what we see in reality, right? And how we can essentially take these logical concepts and then play games with them and create things like paradoxes. I guess in life, I kind of am a believer that paradoxes aren't necessarily a falsity or something that isn't proper, but it's more like a present that needs to be unwrapped, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that sounds
And
fair to me. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that by kind of delving into linguistic paradoxes, logical paradoxes, and whatnot, we can glean kind of like wisdom, if you would, from it that's applicable to our
oh,
world.
One of the people in the comments asked if you could turn your volume up, if it's possible. But
let me see here.
If not, you might maybe just closer to your face or
yeah. Here, let me try speaking a little louder. Is that better?
Sure. I think it's better. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so one topic I kind of wanted to get into is the topic of antithesis, and essentially for something to need an opposite in order to be defined. So my thought goes is you have the age-old story, a lot of authors have written on it, where you have this concept where everything kind of comes to a singularity at the end of time. So you could say like expansion, life, everything, it kind of all comes together into one point until the, stars die, things die off, whatnot. So almost like a Big Bang reversing, if you would. And then my thought is if this thing singularizes and becomes one, and there's nothing outside of that singular point, then how do you define it? Is it to say that something lacks definition before something comes along to give it reason to have definition? Is like the undefinable therefore irrelevant until it becomes relevant? And only is it relevant when it actually becomes relevant? So you see where this kind of gets into a paradoxical nature. Are you kind of catching where I'm going?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm following along, but examples might help as well. Like, are you talking about cosmology when you talk about singularity? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, so a great example would be like an anti-de Sitter space versus a de Sitter space. So you have this idea of negative curvature versus positive curvature in space-time.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing that, and I say space-time because a lot of people just think space and they take time out of the equation.
Right.
So I think that anti-de Sitter spaces, the idea is that everything intersects at all points by nature of the system. So you might say that time and space itself are a static system that if you were to look at it from the outside, it's one piece. And then you have de Sitter spaces, if I'm not mistaken, are positively curved. And you send off these lines, these intersecting points in all directions, and they'll never intersect. And then it comes to a thought, well, okay, you start to run into these paradoxes, right? Where if anti-de Sitter spaces, everything intersects simultaneously, does that make it a closed system that new potentiality cannot come from? And then therefore it intersects with nothing in a sense other than itself, right? So then I think in the topic of God and theology, how would you pull something out of an anti-de Sitter space, let alone put something into it? So I think to God as being an outside force or a creator of everything, he would have to be within the space to even be a part of the space. And then I think, okay, well, if de Sitter spaces are not that way, you could put things, they reach towards something in a sense, then eventually that would be infinite. And in the confines of infinity, everything would still intersect because they would all meet each other just by going far enough out into the void. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be the actual things themselves, but it would. What would be the difference if you seen an exact replica, a cosmic replica of something, just by expanding and going far and far enough out into your own curvature?
Okay, yeah, that is a lot. This is actually the first time I've ever heard of de Sitter or anti-de Sitter space, so I'm going to do my best. I'm not familiar with mathematical models of the universe, so
you might recognize anti-de Sitter spaces. This would be string theory as the primary birthing concept.
Okay, yeah, that helps a little bit. Yeah, so take everything I say with a grain of salt.
Of course.
So I can tell you from without being informed about the science part of it, the physics part of it, and being I actually did my dissertation on philosophy of science, but not on this area. I did it on like theory replacement and stuff, which is super fascinating anyway, but it's a completely different area. So I'll say here, I would recommend just someone to go follow up with, and then I'll tell you what my paltry view is. So we'll just take it that way. So someone to go follow up on this. It was a colleague of mine, a classmate of mine at Baylor. His name's Father Robert. He was a priest. And He's but don't hold that against him. He's Father Robert Verrill, OP. He's Dominican priest, brilliant guy. Even before he joined the priesthood, he already had a doctorate in mathematics from Cambridge University in the UK.
Nice.
And he's like becoming a software developer. And he's like, I want to do something else with my life. So they sent him over to California. He did a master's in theology there. And they sent him down to Texas and he did another doctorate in philosophy of physics. So he is someone who gets this stuff. And now he's back at Oxford University teaching at Blackfriars College. So like this is right up his alley. And I can give you his contact. Actually, I'll put it in the chat, his name.
Nice, that would help.
And I can even, if you can contact him, you could even send him the video clip from this actual video.
Yeah, let me just, if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and hit record right here.
Of course, yeah.
There you go. That's
so,
easy.
Yeah.
You know.
So that's his name in the chat, and yeah. So you can record this, or you can go back and watch the recording and just clip it and just send him the video. Hey, at this minute mark, watch this, and so and he can handle your questions a lot better than I can. Now, as far as like my take on this from a Thomistic perspective. And classical Christian perspective,
it's definitely not logical, necessarily scientific. I'm looking more dominion, perception.
It's exactly right, because like science nowadays are like scientific theories, right?
Yeah.
Like this is something I can talk about with some authority. So we proceed with the scientific method. You know, you did learn this in school. It's like, here's a scientific method, test this hypothesis. It's really not like that anymore. It's here's a whole theory based on the observation, and we're just going to kind of hold this theory until a new observation can, just say it's falsified, right? So really, it's then at this point, when you have a really workable theory, people will oftentimes kind of dig in their heels on the theory and not want to give it up in the face of new observations because they become partial to it or whatever, or because they think it's true, and that's respectable, But you have this like defense of the theories in the face of observation, and they're very workable theories. But they may be false. Like what they have going for them is they're very workable, they're very successful, but they may be completely false as well. So this is where knowing that it now becomes really important to understand how essential philosophy is, because that's basically what a person at this stage is doing. They're doing philosophy. They're not doing the science. They're not doing the observations at this point. They're philosophizing, using theories and concepts and abstraction and so on. So this is where philosophy can help. So all that said, I'm, of course, coming from a Thomistic, that is after Thomas Aquinas' perspective, as a Christian philosopher and classical Christian philosophy and their conceptions of God. You are right that he is usually always construed as being outside time. Now, a current physicist would look at that and be like, that's problematic, see, because we know all of space-time is what exists. And it's like, hold on, wait, that's a presupposition that yes, within our observational field, that's all that exists, right? And so, well, what are you looking for in your observational field? Material, physical thing. Okay, well, that's why that's all you can see, So there's that big kind of butting of heads. But it's not necessarily that God exists outside of space-time. That's one classical approach. Another one is that he exists in space-time, and yet it just emanates from him. I don't know what Thomas Aquinas' view is on this, or other philosophers. This would be kind of like a Spinoza view, but he was Jewish. So you have that view as well. And there are different theories of time too. It's like, does God see everything at once, or does God see the future that hasn't happened? So like all these are like really important theories and things to go into when you're trying to make sense of like what science is saying now. So I've said a lot there that may or may not be helpful. So what do you think? I'll let you jump in here.
So it brings me to a thought of kind of like source time and whatnot. And I think back to like speed, right? That's a thing to take into mind too. And when you go to a certain speed and you rotate around a gravitational body fast enough, your time dilates, it slows. And so my thought is, if when you approach the speed of light, mathematically speaking, the dilation hits zero. And so I wonder, okay, how would light as a source of something that exists outside of the passage of time be affecting physical reality? So another case of dominion, right, is Is the light held within its own realm, or is the what, and in terms of God, Christianity, I'm an omnist myself, so it's more of a big picture type thing for me. But yeah, in that sense, just looking to pick your brain about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I had not thought ever about like the relation of light to like space time, and whether it's, I just always assumed, maybe naively, that it was just kind of part and parcel. It's just going to be involved or whatever. I hadn't even thought about it dilating the speed, and then, I have no idea about that. So yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I wouldn't know what to say about that.
Okay, and I know that like Hermeticism talks a lot about like as above and so below and stuff like that, and that really kind of is more the direction I'm intending to like kind of push it, less of like a play of math and more of like the relationship of like how that would define us, I guess, in a sense, right? Is if this is all ever present and as it is, and then we seem to be moving forward and not backward or staying still, then I don't know. It's
Yeah, so that sounds to me, you mentioned Hermeticism and so on. It sounds to me also, I would mention here some mystical theologians, like I think Meister Eckhart was a German theologian, and I think he also, he pre-theologian, philosopher, mystic, and I think he might have done some, maybe or maybe not done some science, but only like your, 1300s, 14th century science that might have been like with botany or something like that. So he would have been like much, much earlier than could be very helpful to these exact questions. Another theologian you could look up is a woman called Hildegard von Bingen. You may have heard of her. She's was big, I think, in the 1100s, and she also was a mystic. That's why I'm mentioning her, but also she was a scientist as well. So they may have, I know Hildegard, for example. Now, Meister Eckhart, I may be wrong about him being a scientist, but I know Hildegard, and I'd also mention here Albert the Great. He was actually the teacher of Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus. I want to say, he was a mineralogist, and so he had some scientific training as well. As all three of these guys, I think, are saints and like theologians in the Catholic faith and so on. But yeah, so aside from Meister Eckhart, I know that the last two are definitely scientists as well. Obviously, very primitive compared to ours, but they may have some really insightful observations to make about, the relation of science to theology, or the relation of science to God, for example. Yeah.
And have you read the Diamond Sutra before?
No.
Okay. Never mind then. I was looking. Okay. I'm mostly looking for content material and whatnot.
Okay.
And
cool.
Just general discussion. So. Okay. That's I guess that's pretty much all I really had to ask.
Cool. Good. Yeah, I wish I could be more helpful. Yeah, but
no, this is wonderful. I got 8 names to go into.
Great,
so.
Cool. Yeah, Father Robert, he's wonderful guy. He's very, very generous with his time. So long as he's not overly busy with pastoral, priestly duties and teaching and research and all that. I mean, I look at somebody who does his stuff, and I'm like, thank God there's somebody like that, because I could never do that. Yeah, I know my limits, and this is not it. So yeah, so I definitely. But that's the benefit of like making contact with somebody who, like, I'm barely in academia as I am, in the places that I do. Yeah. I mean, I am, but not like I'm not like all over academia. I'm just in my tiny little corner. But having the connections that I do, I can be like, I know somebody who you can talk to, and that's really helpful. Yeah,
and that's a big thing for me, because I ended up dropping out of school for financial reasons.
Yeah,
I was only able to ever pursue a small degree, but it's nice having even people like you where I can go to that is an academic source and still be able to find my information.
Yeah, if I don't know the answer, I can point you to somebody who knows it a lot better than I do. So
yeah,
all right, well.
So anyway, thank you. I appreciate you meeting.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for calling in. Yeah, I hope to see you again sometime.
Of course, yeah. Right. I might ask you weird things that don't really mean much sense, I guess, to most people, but
that's all right. Yeah,
thoughts in my head. I guess that's philosophy, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. Well, good to see you, and I'll talk to you next time then.
Great. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, cool. So we're getting a little bit further in here. This is great, guys. So let me reset the clock here. And then we're going to bring in our next guest. By the way, before I do this, bring in the next guest, I want to make sure that if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. This helps the channel. This helps it grows. And like Sluxzilla was saying, he's like surprised this hasn't blown up. This is on you guys. I mean, I try to get the best content and talk to as many people as I can. And if you like this approach, if you like this thing that I'm doing, whatever we're doing here, and please like it, comment, subscribe, all that helps. And also go watch the videos. Not only last one I did on 3 parts of morality on Monday, but next Monday I'm doing one on the trolley problem. That's what Daniel was mentioning in the first caller. So, all right, we're gonna bring on Alan here, and good to see you again, Alan.
Yeah, hey man, how you doing?
Mr. Jeremy Renner, nice to see you.
Yeah. How you doing? You having a good one?
Great, yeah, I'm good, yeah.
That's good to hear. No, I've been listening to this for a while now. A couple guests ago, I don't remember.
Cool, yeah, thanks for being so
what his
patient,
name was.
because yeah, I know it's
Oh yeah, I
it
like
doesn't go
listening to your
quickly.
show, man.
Good, cool, I'm glad.
I like hearing what you guys have to say. I might not agree with
Yeah.
everything, but I like,
Of course,
you speak calmly. You have a nice tone of voice. You explain your positions nicely. I like hearing some other perspectives sometimes. You know what I mean?
Good. I'm glad. I appreciate that. Yeah, it always blows my
Anyway,
mind that like people want to spend their afternoons or evenings talking to little old me. But whatever. If people like it, I'll keep it up. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I think
Yeah.
I think it's just nice to talk to someone in a respectful way. That I mean, a lot of these people. Well, I mean, this is kind of why I'm calling specifically right now.
Sure.
I had a conversation. I do this a lot where I schedule like call-ins or debates, whatever you want to call them, right? I just like talking with people. I like hearing the other side. And I had a conversation with, you can't even call it a conversation, but I had a small talk with a gentleman last night, who his name is Brother Maverick on YouTube. I'll cut to the chase. But I called in and he said, it was like open debate topic, ask me whatever you want. Very religious man. I was like, all right, I have some questions. I don't remember. I mean, I talked to you maybe a couple of weeks ago about how, raised Christian slowly becoming less and less Christian, slowly becoming a little bit more disenfranchised with the ideas of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I called and I asked him this specific question which I'm going to ask you for an answer if you have one. Do you think that the Christian morality system, because you were talking earlier that you think that morality should be based in God, do you think that the Christian morality system is inherently the one? Like, is that the one that most humans should follow? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which is a totally fine perspective. I asked him that, and then I asked next, do you think that people, the average Joe, or especially within our like political system now, using said morality and using the Bible and God's teachings as the backbone for their morality, do you think that they're using it correctly, or do you think that they've strayed a little far away from the original teachings?
Yeah, not always. Yeah, and people are going to misunderstand. I mean, this is what Jesus says. Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven. Not everybody who pretends to be Christian or who uses Christian principles, at the very least. You could be somebody as evil as Hitler and use a couple Christian principles.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't mean you're doing it right. Yeah.
And so that was like that feels like the common sentiment. That's common sentiment that I grew up around at the very least. So that makes sense to me, and I do agree with that. I think that my stance as I'm getting older is, so obviously I agree with a lot of Christian moral sentiments, like pretty much everything, right? I mean, there's some good stuff in there. There's some good stuff that obviously there's a reason why so many societies built their laws and systems around them. I'm not ever going to debate that. It makes sense why we created this baseline based on, biblical teachings. I think that at this point, though, and this is my question for you, is it even worth, even though they may be based on godly principles, right? Is it, sorry, how do I articulate this correctly or in the best possible way? I don't want to. We've already reached this point in society, right? Using God as a moral backbone. And we already have these quote unquote moralities. Some people will call them natural law, atheistic, or like atheists, etc. We'll call it it's just a law of life. Don't kill people. Killing is bad. Don't cause human suffering. You know what I mean? And even though they may come from the Bible, I see a lot of people try to justify even more bigoted beliefs on the same level, right? Where they just say, oh, but it's in the Bible. And so, like, do you think killing's bad? And this is what the conversation evolved in with that gentleman. He was like, do you think that murder's bad? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, that came from the Bible. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
so like when you say, because he's, I mean, incredibly homophobic, I was like, when you say that gay people are an abomination and may need to be put to death, you're obviously basing that off the Bible as well. Do you think that they're like in the same realm? And he said yes. And he called me a hypocrite for saying, you know, for only believing some godly morals, you need to look in the Bible more. And then he just hung up on me. It was incredibly frustrating. And I'm not even trying to just hate on him, but so my position when it comes down to that, and I guess why I'm asking you, I think that some quote unquote, you know, like morals that come from the Christian God, I think have been construed in a way that leads to more human suffering and leads to more division. And I think that saying that, you know, murder is bad is not the same. Do you get what I mean?
I totally get what you mean. Yeah. This is what I'd say. A lot of the principles, like when he says, well, that's murder's wrong, you get it from the Bible. I mean, yes and no, right? It is one of the 10 Commandments, sure.
Right, yeah.
It's also that we know Christian philosophers have worked this out over the centuries and given credit where credit's due. They're like, look, even other civilizations have come to learn through natural means of knowledge, through natural revelation. They distinguish between natural revelation and special, or general revelation and special revelation. Special revelation is where God specifically revealed himself through Scripture. Generally, general revelations generally to all men. And so through general revelation, naturally speaking, men come to know that certain things are wrong, right? And that's not shocking. That's not a shocking fact. It's just, you know that. And so, and you know this through the moral law, which is kind of like, it's like the natural law. When philosophers, especially in the Christian tradition, talk about the natural law, they're talking about the moral law, not like laws of physics, but the natural moral law is like it's like the moral fabric of all the universe. And so it's like what holds things together. Like even if we forgot to make a murder law, like a law about murder, and just society for some reason just forgot to write that one down, it would still be wrong. Why? Because it violates the moral law. So all that to say that he wasn't completely right there, that, you know, it's a yes and no. But,
that's where I'm looking at it from. I guess my thing is that I feel like we've already come to these conclusions. Like you just said, regardless of if there's a law about it, causing human suffering is bad. I think most people, if not all people, in some extent will agree that doing an action to deliberately cause suffering for another human being is wrong, right?
Okay, let me wrap this up. This is probably an essential point I need to add on here before.
Sure, brother.
Sorry about that. So the question is, like, even let's say so-called heathens or non-religious people, whatever, atheist, agnostic, whoever, people of other religions, they can all agree that murder is wrong, and they can all agree with respect to this natural law. But the question is, like, where did that natural law come from? And of course, theists are going to say, well, God gave the natural law. That's why murder is wrong, because he wrote it into the natural fabric of all reality that this is wrong and this is against our nature, and so on and so forth. And you get a lot of other moral principles out of that. And so that shouldn't be surprising that you can derive moral principles without Scripture. Like, that's not surprising at all. But ultimately, they're going to find their origin in God.
And even, I guess my position, especially, I don't know, I'm not going to get too far into it because it is a really sad story, but I read something that genuinely broke my heart that kind of is pushing me towards this idea that, yes, regardless of where the origin of said moral principle comes from, I think that using I don't want to say excuse, but it's the only word that's coming to mind right now, using the fact that it was originally, you know, it originates from religious principles, I think is kind of an excuse at this point, because we've already decided in this, you know, Christian formed nation, these moralities exist for a reason, right? So like I heard a story, and I'm not going to get into the entire thing, but this kind of ruined my day. I'll be real with you about you're aware of the Florida, you know, I don't know, the abortion ban and the way that they set it up.
I know, I'm aware, but not like a particulars. Yeah.
So they have a heartbeat law now, right? Are we allowed to get into this? I don't want to ruin the show.
Totally. Yeah. No, this is totally fair game.
Okay, so Ron DeSantis pushed for it under a religious principle that
I don't think on religious principles. I think on scientific principles that life begins at conception, and that
you would say that life begins at conception.
Every biology textbook that that is
Right.
in schools right now says life begins at conception. It's just like,
Yes.
what is that life? What
Yeah,
is
the
that life,
concept
and
of
what
life,
value does
sure.
it have? Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So the way that, yeah, okay, fair enough. I get what you're saying. There's a woman who was told at like mid-pregnancy, like
Mhm.
she was doing a routine, everything was going great. She planned for the pregnancy. There was a father around. You know what I mean? She was ready for this baby. They did a routine ultrasound. You can look this up, Elevate. It was, I
Mhm.
think it's the baby Milo story. It was on Washington Post.
Okay.
Anyway, she was told that an ultrasound, like, the baby's lungs are not forming correctly. And, like, the moment of birth, that baby will choke to death and die. There is, without a doubt, that child will not live past an hour, right? And so she, in that, made a very difficult decision to try to, unfortunately, abort said fetus because she didn't want
Yeah.
to go through any of that, and she didn't want the baby to suffer. Florida law denied it. She carried the child for the rest of her term. The baby was born. The baby died in her arms. It caused a lot of trauma for her family. It cost her $12,000. She had no want for this. She obviously is not very happy about that. And I talked to another, I guess just Christian YouTuber about that same topic, and he called me disgusting for even like assuming that God would have done anything wrong in that situation. His idea was that God wanted this to happen. Maybe he just wanted her to persevere through this. Maybe, they all had a plan. There was all a point, and therefore that is why you should not be able to abort said baby, right? But my position is that the banning that, did not save any life, right? It didn't allow that child to have a life, and it actually caused more human suffering because of it. Nothing.
Arguably.
I don't think any positive was gained by that, even though a lot of people point to a religious morality of why that would be, why it's bad. I'd like to hear your take on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I jump in on this just so we know, this is called casuistry, which is like case study, right? Of morality. And we can draw principles from casuistry, but we also need to take the opposite spectrum, radical end approach of like abstract moral principles and applying them to cases, right? So you can always start with cases and be like, okay, what moral principles are here? But it may not be a good guide, right? I mean, because cases, understandably can evoke emotion. It's like, oh, that seems wrong. But like, well, that only seems wrong to a person. Well, let's use an example, moral disgust, for example. Moral disgust can be a really good guide, but it's only a good guide if you're well-formed and a virtuous person. Like, if you are disgusted at the wrong things, like things that are wrong, that is, then that's a good example of moral disgust. You're disgusted at bad things. If you are disgusted at good things, well, you're not going to be somebody who's reliable about your moral disgust. So same thing here. Like if people get emotional about this, that doesn't mean anything yet. Like, I don't know the full story. I don't know if this is an enraging to a person. That doesn't tell me whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. If it's sad to a person, that doesn't tell me whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So, again, emotions can be a good guide, but
decision? Do you think that it was the correct moral decision for the state to deny said abortion? Like personally?
So let me jump on the actual case now. Yes, I do think that it was right. Why? Because I think what they did was they avoided an evil, which is a killing of an infant. Not just killing, a murder of an infant, right? Why do I say a murder? Because it's an innocent taking of an innocent human life, right?
But an innocent, and see, I do understand I get that, because
so it's an intentional killing, like and even in medical ethics.
I mean, like in a war, right? We kill
but it's not murder. But it's not murder, right? Because it's not an innocent human life.
That bombing a village in a war is more ethical than aborting a fetus that is going to die within the hour and cause medical debt and trauma for everyone involved.
I mean, I don't
know.
No,
I'm not trying to argue with you, but I mean,
that's fine. No,
if killing in a war is immoral, then why would that be immoral?
Hold on, pause. It's immaterial whether it's one bad is bad versus another, like which one is more bad, whatever. We can both say that that's bad. Bomb a village. That's why it's a war crime, right? Because it's why? What's the principle there? It's taking of an innocent human life intentionally, right? And that's what we see in abortion, is taking an innocent human life intentionally. Now, when the baby was born, there was not a taking of an innocent life intentionally, right? And that's why there was an absent evil. Like there was no more evil or bad action, morally bad action happening, right? So what that law did was restrain individuals from committing a morally evil action, a morally bad action, right? And yes, the fetus, let's call it the baby, died, right? I wonder if you were to ask the mother after the baby was born, do you want to kill it now? Just mercy killing, right? It lived to be about 90 minutes. Lived to about, it says 99 minutes.
Yes.
If you were to ask that mother at minute 15 if she wanted to kill that baby or if she wanted to just have that skin-to-skin contact and just have it lay on her in the last minutes of its life, do you think she would agree to kill that baby at that point?
I don't know.
Probably not. Why? Because in our minds we understand, oh, that's a live human being right now. But that's the crux of the issue. It's not okay to kill a live human being, whether it's out of the womb or in the womb, right? Because why? Because that's it's an intentional killing of an innocent human life. But that's the same thing inside of a womb, that intentional killing and taking of an innocent human life. So why is it less wrong when it's outside of the womb?
So are you against medical euthanasia as well then?
But notice, of course I am. Notice though, if she had agreed to take that baby's life within the first 15 minutes of being born, that would have prevented, just like you're saying, it would have prevented all that future suffering. So why wouldn't she have done it?
What do you mean? Because that's what humans classify as murder on a typical basis.
Yes, but why do they classify it as murder? It's the taking of an innocent human life. And that's exactly what you have in the case of abortion. The taking of an innocent human life. Like no amount of, hey, let's avoid future trauma. Hey, let's avoid future harm. Hey, this is really it's going to cost a lot. None of that matters when it's the taking of an innocent human life. This is why in the pro-life, pro-choice abortion debate, the crux of the issue is whether the fetus is a person, whether it's a person with full moral status and dignity. And pro-lifers say yes, and pro-choicers say no, generally speaking.
Yeah, I suppose. I don't know. It genuinely rocked me to my core that someone would be so apathetic about that and just say, "Oh, but the Bible said so." Bye. And I was
notice. I hope that you're not getting
you articulated it very well, and I appreciate.
Yeah.
No, you're articulating the point very well. I appreciate hearing what you have to say.
And it's unfortunate that and I will call this out. It's unfortunate that with Catholic or Christian or whoever they were, religious people online who are creators who just don't have the thinking skills, and they just, like, this is what I was mentioning earlier, like that's the thing that gets clicks when they hang up on people and they cause drama and so on, right? They cause consternation and angry people, and now the comments blow up. Why? Because people are angry, the people worry, and the algorithm says, oh, that must be a video everybody is interested in, so I'm going to promote it, and it gets more views and everything, and people just love that.
Right.
But these creators are they don't have very much integrity, and they're by and large, and this is one of the greatest frustrations that I'm experiencing as a small creator, like those creators who are making it big, doing it wrongly, are people who are generally uneducated about these things. It's really sad and unfortunate.
But I mean, I guess and that rounds around to my, and appreciate it for articulating so well. You're so respectful. God, I really like you. I really like hearing what you have to say. I'm just saying, I'm a genuine fan of your channel, brother.
I appreciate it, yeah.
But that's why I think that we should, and I think that we will eventually, regardless of, I think that we should ditch. I agree with it. Trust me. I still say that I stand on Christian principles. I do believe in God. I do pray. I'm just saying, I do not think that if people are willing, I don't think that I can't articulate this in the way that I would like to. Apologies, but I think we should move past. I think we should move past the concept of, but God said it's okay, or God said it's not okay, right?
Because it's an easy out.
That's what I'm saying. Because it's a genius. It's honestly a genius business model for young Christians, because they win any argument. They win any argument they want to, because all I have to say is, well, the Bible said this, and you didn't believe that, so you're a heathen. So I shouldn't even have to talk to you. Bye. Yeah. And I think that it's a cheap thing when we can just talk about the fact that said morals would have developed in society regardless, right? Even though, yes, there's a godly origin.
So as a Christian, I absolutely agree with you. That is a cheap out, and nobody should be taking that out. Yeah, that's just not becoming of what it means to be a Christian. It's just kind of fall back on these excuses and not give the whole story. As Christians, we have like the whole complete picture. We have the resources to explain why certain things are wrong. So if you're going to be a public voice about this stuff, you need to be honest, intellectually honest about these things and know your stuff, right? And I fail in this area sometimes. Like I'll speak about a subject and I'll be like, crap, I didn't really like do my prep before that video or something like that. And it comes back to bite me. So, you know, I know it's incredibly difficult, but the resources are out there, you know, like, and nobody is asking any one single person to be the genius who knows everything like that. That's why, just to remind everybody, like the resources are out there. And the idea that like Christians have access to these things, they have access to not only God said it, the Bible, right, but also human reason and morality of the natural law and so on, and then all these good principles that make society work and so on. Like all of these things come into play, and so if you're only just going to focus myopically on just the Bible said it, that's so lazy.
Right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I agree, and I appreciate it. I mean,
Yeah.
dude, you're great. We need more people like you. I need to compliment you a little bit, man. Thank you for having this talk. You are the people that make me, you know, still have faith and still make me want to be a part of this. I'm just saying. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm
I
not the only
appreciate
one.
it.
I promise you, there are more people.
Oh, I know that. No, trust me, I'm
Yeah.
very aware. The internet is a disgusting place, no matter how you
It
spin
is.
it.
Yep.
But
Get off, go touch
it
grass.
is a bit,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is that it is a bit disheartening when I see that. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of what's been
Yes.
pushing me down this road. So
Yep.
it's nice to talk with someone that can actually articulate their points and talk about it like a normal human being. Appreciate it, brother.
Of course. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll talk to you
Yeah, of
next time
course.
you're on.
Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. See ya. All right. Yeah. And yeah, just there are lots and lots of people who are out there doing good work. It's just a matter of finding them. I know Joe Heschmeyer, who I did a collab with. He works for Catholic Answers. He is somebody, Joe Heschmeyer. If you look up his channel, it's called Shameless Popery, like being a popery. He's got some great material, and he's very fair, and he's very intelligent and educated. He's got a degree in theology and philosophy, and he's got a Juris Doctorate in law, and like he knows his stuff a lot better than I know some stuff. So he's great. He's fair. Trent Horn is also very great and fair. They were practicing what I was talking about with an earlier caller about, you know, recognizing when there is common ground. Like I'm learning that practice and seeing other people like them, and I'm like, I need to do more of that because we could certainly use like less talking past each other, right? And yeah. All right, so there are several people in the lobby, so I'm going to bring in our next guest here, Adam. Good to see you, and not really see you. If you do want to turn your camera on, please by all means do so. But yeah, I don't know if we've met yet, so welcome. And what do you want to talk about? Are you there, Adam?
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We haven't spoken before.
Okay, well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Are you a Christian?
I am, yeah.
And you discuss theological issues?
Yeah, so this channel, my educational and academic background is philosophy specifically, but I do delve into like philosophy of religion, yeah, and then some theology as well.
All right. So do you have a belief on whether God's energies or graces are created or uncreated?
Yeah, I would think that they're uncreated.
They're uncreated, okay. Well, I understand that that's the Eastern Orthodox position, and within the Catholic Church, I know that there's a diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
So
could you be more specific about what you mean about the God's energies or graces? Just so we're all on the same page.
Well, graces I typically interpret to mean things like humility, charity, revelation, and energies I would take to mean like the creation of matter.
Okay.
So presumably God creates both of those things. Is that what you understand God's energies to be?
Okay, good. Yeah. So thanks for allowing me to clarify. So as far as matter, obviously that's going to be created. And as far as graces, insofar as they are part and parcel, I mean, God doesn't exist in parts, but if they are parts of God or aspects or elements of God, that is just his nature. then those are going to be uncreated. Let's say that it's in his character, deeply embedded, to be forgiving or loving, right? That part will be uncreated, but when it's instilled in human beings or realized in human beings, then that will be, of course, created, because it will be a new instance of the thing, the source. Like this, like transcendental would be in God, and then the instance of that transcendental of that thing would be created, if that helps.
Okay. Well, I think I understand the position. So I just don't think that it makes sense to say that graces are a part of God, or that there's I can't remember the way that you phrased it, so that there's some transcendental aspect of basically the kind of aspects of structure. That's the view that I would be arguing against. So I would always argue that the graces, as well as the energies, are both they're both a will. Right, so they're a kind of intent that God. They're just like intentional states that God has, and they're not structural parts. So, I mean, I'd regard God to be a mind. I'd say that parts are like static things. They're not functional. They're not in the mathematical sense. They're not functional. So, a function in mathematics is something that transfers transfers an element to another, from one space to another space.
Okay.
So I think that the issue is that I would basically ask you if you regard graces to transmit something, like to be the transmission of something, or if you think that there's any kind of static aspect to them.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So it gets to the nature of God himself. Yeah, so I take the position, along with like classical philosophers and many Catholic philosophers like Aquinas, who will say that God is unchangeable. He's immutable, right? So he's just and he's pure actuality. Like everything is going to be actual and like actualized in him. There's going to be no potentiality in him whatsoever. So there's going to be no like latent power that God could have, yet will be realized later. Everything that includes thoughts as well and ideas, like every thought that God could possibly have is going to be actual to God at all times, because he is pure actuality. So everything that God could possibly have, he already has, including these graces. So in that sense, these will be uncreated if we mean by that, like we're talking about the attributes of God, that he is loving, for example. And if we ever receive that grace as Christians to be loving like God, what that means is, we are creatures, of course. So whatever attributes we take on will move from potential to actual. And in that sense, it will be a new thing that we take on. It will be created in us in a sense, right? But its origin uncreated. But Christian authors do talk about the idea that would be described in terms of becoming more unified in likeness, or there's actually St. John of the Cross distinguishes them. He's known for his Dark Night of the Soul literature, but he's actually a scholastic author and thinker as well. But he distinguishes between a unity of affections and a unity of likeness. So this would be a unity of affections between the Christian and God, that you would become unified in love and forgiveness and kindness and so on, but you won't be ever unified in likeness towards God, because you're still a creature. You won't be like God in that sense of substance, but yeah, so we can unite to God in affections and become more like Christ, more like God in that sense. Of course, other religious systems like Mormons do think you can, like unite to God in likeness and become like God that way, but the Christians don't. So, yeah, does that help? Like, is this helping at all? Like me helping to like catch this out a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think that identifies probably where we'll disagree.
Okay,
I think
sure.
that we would probably. It sounds like we agree on the manner in which we participate in God's energies. So if I pray and I receive some grace and I sort of perceive that I've just received something, it's quite obvious that that's created because it's subject to conditions. Where we might disagree is that I would like to see if you have just to hear what your basis is for saying that God is purely actual and that there's no potentiality, because I can think of a couple of places where I disagree. So,
sure.
For example, I'm an open theist, So I think that God's knowledge increases, despite the fact that he's also omniscient. So he knows all.
Okay.
He knows all true propositions, but so propositions that are in the future that are contingent on human free will, they don't have a truth value. So there's nothing to know until they become actual.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and let's also say the same thing about like treasure in heaven. It's like what human beings do to earn their treasure in heaven. Those things aren't actual yet. So the point of time is for God to discover himself and to sort of increase the treasure, and that's just going to continue forever.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm an open theist. I think that God has potential, and that we are like an aperture. We're like an aperture or a gate for that potential.
That makes total sense. Yeah. So I toyed around with open theism when it was very trendy, like in early 2010s. And then that was before it became Catholic. And I don't think that's Catholic position at all. I don't, I think it gets most of its currency on, if you're talking about theories of time, A theory versus B theory of time. Are you familiar with that distinction? But we can describe it for the audience. So A theory of time is like a spotlight, going across like a timeline. And so wherever the spotlight is, that's the present, and whatever it hasn't, whatever it's already passed, that's going to be the past. And it exists, but only insofar as it's past. But the stuff that the spotlight hadn't gotten to yet doesn't exist. And that's a very intuitive idea. And this, I think, open theism gets a lot of currency on, because again, if God, open theists can still declare that God is omniscient, but with an asterisk by that word omniscient. They say omniscient because this means knowing all things that are possible to know. And it's not possible to know something that doesn't exist, namely the future. So God just won't have knowledge of those things. And so they think that preserves omniscience. Now, I don't know about open theists' relationship with the B theory of time. The B theory of time is it's almost like you can think of it as like a wheel. If it's cyclical, or maybe that helps. Maybe it's not cyclical, but all items of past, present, and future are equally present to God, whether God exists outside of time or in time or some other different relationship with time. But all of those are equally real to God. I think, at first, because it wasn't that intuitive to think that way, I was like, no, that's obviously not right. But now I'm warming up to that position a little bit. I don't really have a dog in the fight, but it seems to be more plausible. And this, I would think this would cut against open theist. I can't think of any B theorists who think open theism is true. That's just sort of the lay of the land. Do you have thoughts on how I've construed that, and would you agree with that construal?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have my own issues with the dichotomy between A theory and B theory of time. I'm not totally sure that they're truly dichotomous. So I mean, I can agree that time has potential, but that only the present and the past exist.
So okay, good. So so this means that I can completely understand why certain graces given to humans based on their subjective or contingent nature, and based on the future as not being real and not existing yet, then sure, those instantiations of God's grace are going to be unknown to God, let's say, who gets it. Now, I will challenge this, though. I did read about this, or maybe I just kind of had this idea of my own when I was looking through this. Another way to preserve God's omniscient, and perhaps even his knowing of who will get the graces in the future, is to place it in terms of laws of physics, the past and the present, and say that God is omniscient of all those things for sure. We have very limited perspective, of course, but God would know based on all of our dispositions and habits and likelihoods and probabilities. It would be somebody like Doctor Strange, in the Avengers movies, who's calculating all the probabilities and knows from that there will be only one path way forward. And in that sense, kind of derivative sense, knows the future. Would you say that if that were the scenario with God, that he would, he could know that people will get the graces, or would you still want to kind of resist that?
Well, I would resist. I think that certainly there are deterministic patterns on which we can base some kind of probabilistic estimation. But that still doesn't secure the whether something's true or false. When it comes to human actions, when it comes to human actions that are based on free will, the only thing that secures it is the human deciding that.
Yeah. This might highlight a potential disagreement again, another potential disagreement between us, because I think that while humans have free will, I do believe in libertarian free will. I'm a libertarian, but not a radical libertarian. I think that our habits and dispositions, our virtues, our vices, really constrain our possibilities as well. And so, if I knew that, if I were omniscient, if I knew all those things about a person, then freedom will be constrained in some sense with respect to virtues and vices. Like if you're a chronic liar, you are constrained with the possibility to then, right in that instant, tell the truth. But down the road, you might. So there's a little bit of flexibility there in free will, but you have to kind of you're not, certain possibilities, that is to say, are just going to be closed to you. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but thoughts on that?
Well,
so I believe really strongly in character, habits, virtues, vices, and so on, and that might limit the nature of libertarian free will. That was the idea.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to hear is, sure. Did you have an argument that God doesn't have potential, that he's completely actual?
Yeah. I do think that if you make a God that is mutable, this in some sense makes him less sovereign. That's my understanding. I think there are arguments in Aquinas' Summa about this. Similar arguments would also go towards there just being one God. If you're going to have a totally perfect and complete God, absolute perfection, you can't have a God that lacks anything. And so if you have a God with potential, that is necessarily saying that your God lacks something currently that could have later, and is therefore less perfect. Perfecta in Latin, perfectus, just means complete as well. So you're saying that you now have a God less perfect or complete, that later on he will be more perfect or more complete because he has the thing that he was lacking before. So this is why many Christian philosophers of classical antiquity and medieval period want to say, no, God is just purely actual.
Okay, well, I guess my response is going to be that I can have a conception of perfection to just mean to having the maximum possible, right? So if there's different conceptions of perfection. So one is some kind of category that contains all subcategories. So a perfect circle, it's just a circle that represents every other circle. And then the other is obviously having the maximum of something. So if I get a perfect score in an exam, if I get 10 out of 10, that's a perfect score. So I can believe that God is perfect whilst being an open theist. So in the sense that perfection in the sense of either omnibenevolence or omniscience, that would just mean that all the knowledge that exists, God has. And omnibenevolence would just mean that God's intentions are always towards the integrity of life and revelation and revealing truth. And that doesn't seem I can believe both those things and be an open theist, and also believe that God has potential. So when somebody says whether God has potential or not, to me that just means whether God has free will, right? So he has the potential to decide otherwise.
Yeah, that's called the principle of alternate possibilities, PAP. The idea that the principle says that in order to have free will, what free will means is that you need to have an alternate possibility. This makes sense in the context of human freedom and choice, but in the sense of God, divine choice, most philosophers of religion are just going to deny that the principle of alternate possibilities is required for divine free will. They'll say that because of all these things, I don't know how they'll work it out essentially, but they're going to look at other principles to say you can still preserve freedom, but you don't need that alternate possibility. You don't need to have God could have done this or this other thing in order to be fully free. And this also goes back to this, and this is in the literature as well. It's called Augustinian views of free will, because Augustine, for example, would talk about how to be fully free. I don't know how it is for you. You're probably not American by hearing your accent, but for Americans and just in the West in general, like we're fiercely individualistic and independent. We don't like being told what to do. We like there to be choice. Like we're fiercely libertarian. We don't want to be constricted in our choices. Otherwise, that's constricting our freedoms. But an Augustinian or classical view of freedom is that you can have full freedom within restrictions, and it's the restrictions, having of the restrictions in the structure, that enables you to be more free. And an example of this would be like in music, like you've got to have certain structures in music. You got to play notes, you got to have bars, you got to have measures, and so on. You can play within that, or within art, or within anything like that. Like there has to be certain structures there, and that enables you to actually do the thing and more completely and perfectly, and then also more freely. You have the freedom within those bounds. And so it's kind of foreign to us now today, but this would be how a lot of philosophers like to construe God's freedom, that he wouldn't require that alternate. He wouldn't require an open future, for example, in order to be free. Does that make sense?
He wouldn't require an open future in order to be free.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. It seems like if God is free, he could either have an open future or not. I just never thought of that before.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, if you want, I could just mention how I'd tie together what you just said to potential,
sure.
right? So, well, for me, right, to say that God has freedom just means that God is his own constraint, right? So God just sets his own constraints.
Yes.
If there's constraints, then there's nothing outside of God, because God is omnipresent. So the only thing that could constrain God is God himself. I mean, in order to, for me to think that God has potential, that just means that God can set his own constraints on things. So he can constrain things so that there's things that God can discover. I just say that that's completely compatible. God being self-constraining is compatible with God having intentions to maximize God's own knowledge and the goodness in reality. So obviously people's acts of charity, God's own acts of charity, those sorts of things, and that's where the potential would consist. So I don't see the conflict between God having potential and God having some self-imposed constraint.
I see. Yeah. I don't know if there would be a conflict, but I do know, having, like, I learned about open theism, and then I went on to learn more, like, what classical medieval philosophers say about this, and I was like, oh crap, like, that's not the same. And I think it's just good to be aware that, like, if you're going with a view like open theism, which, by the way, open theism is not just a trendy new thing that was in the 2010s. It's a reworking of an old heresy called Socinianism, by this guy named Socinius. I think he may have been Swiss or something, but I think in the 16th century. And the church declared this a heresy. And they were basing their declaration upon that on older medieval philosophers who had way better arguments than what I'm giving you here, of course. So, I mean, go look at that debate. I think there's a Wikipedia page about Jacobus. I think it's Jacobus Socinius. I could be wrong with that, but yeah. So he, you can read about the whole debate and then, like, do dive down the rabbit hole sort of thing. But yeah, I think anybody going in this direction, open theism, should be aware, as I was not made aware at the time, but should be aware that, like, they were cutting against, like, much older and maybe even more revered tradition than like what this trendy view. I think it offers easy solutions and, like, natural, intuitive ones, but I think having a more robust understanding of what God is and that he can still have preservative freedom over these things, can still exercise his will, doesn't need potentiality, and that there are reasons for this, namely within God's sovereignty and his oneness and not lacking anything, being fully perfect. Like, all those things are going to be reasons why they rejected this heresy. But anyway, that's all I have about that as far as thoughts on that. But I'll let you close. Feel free to be as easy or as hard as you want. Like, I know it's a little bit testy there with the heresy and this and that, but I think it's helpful to be just aware of whatever's being said. But yeah. I'll let you have the last word here.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, if I did have the opportunity to go on further, I think that
Sure.
I would probably just have to start asking, like, why it is that God having the like sovereignty, the other things that you just mentioned, why that would entail that like God's energies and graces are uncreated. Because ultimately, but my position is going to be that God's energies and graces are intense. They're intentions, and those things always have alternatives, so they're created. Whereas, let's say that uncreated aspects of God are the non-contingent things. So the fact that God's a mind, the fact that God's all powerful, I would say that's non-contingent. Like it couldn't logically be otherwise. That sort of thing. Whereas I regard God's graces to be things that can be otherwise, but God doesn't have the willingness to do so, because they are a will. Ultimately, they're a will. They're not logically necessary things. They're choices that God repeatedly makes. So I guess I would probably just leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, those are all great points. I hope you bring it back. So, yeah, call in next time. We'll work it out more. I'll do some more reading on this, apparently, too.
All right. Me too.
All right. Good to talk to you. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, cool. I'll also say this, that take him off. So I'll also say this, that this also, what was it? Gets into, he said God has a mind or is a mind. That's true, but it depends on what we mean by that. And there are whole debates about how to use language about God. And there's whole debates about like, should we use language analogously or equivocally or univocally? So if you want to look further on that, that would be like, so I think the Catholic, or at least Thomistic position, is that we should be using words analogously of God. That is, that he is being analogous to other being, and that he's utterly transcendent and different, but univocal in other senses. Anyway, I would just go look up, let me put it in the chat, analogicity, which is analogous, versus univocity versus equivocity. Right. Okay, so that'll go to the chat. Cool. So, yeah, just a reminder before I bring on Connor here. I'm glad that so many people are calling in. We got such a big lobby that I hope to get to all. So thanks for being patient. And then just to remind you, watch the videos that came out on Monday, the one video on 3 parts of morality. And then next Monday, we're going to be talking about trolley problems. So, all right, cool. So let's bring in Connor here. Good to see you again, Connor. What can we talk about?
Oh, sir. I've been waiting, so I've been watching the stream.
Cool.
Very much enjoying all the discussion so far.
Good. I'm glad.
I think I'm particularly interested in this notion of like what can we say about God? I find to be a very interesting question, because it's obviously a very it's an uphill battle, so to speak.
Yeah.
In the sense that God is an infinite being, right? And I'm very much not an infinite being, and so I'm confined. I'm limited in some sense, and so that's also because that was just sort of the topic of discussion. I think there was a couple things I wanted to note. I'm skeptical of the notion that God possesses free will. I think we've talked about this before. Or at least in this principle of alternative possibilities respect, I don't think God could choose between a suite of options when he created the cosmos. And so I don't know. I think this is sort of weaving in topics that you've covered throughout the show today, but just the idea that you can. I think I can't remember his name, but I think there's a lot of people who feel like there's a lot of ways to get to the what is true and what's correct, I think. and you can rely on specific revelation, or you can rely on like natural reasoning. And I think those are often ways of getting to sort of what's true in some sense.
Yeah. And sorry, I don't know if I'm coming through your speakers or not. So yeah, you either turn it down or it may not be in your headphones. But all right. So it is hard because once you start making any claims about God, as I said with this debate between univocal, equivocal, and illogical, there's that whole debate that raged throughout the Middle Ages and prior. There's also what are known as apophatic theologians that's like to say that they can't talk about what God is because he's so utter transcendent. They can only talk about what God is not. And this gets back to like thesis, antithesis, and so on. So it's called apophatic theology. And you get this in the mystics. It's like, well, God is, we can say, some classical philosophers will agree with this. They'll say, well, yeah, you can say that God is not material, not physical, not in time, those sorts of things, if they're making those sorts of claims. And they just will refuse to make any positive claims about God. But they think that by making these negative claims about God, what God is not, that they can get to more truth about what God is. And very often they can do that. But it may not reveal the whole picture. So it's hard when you're working with utter transcendence, and you're trying to be really careful about your language and usage and your concepts. And it just, it's real difficult.
I also think we moderns have a bit of a difficulty because we're so steeped in the scientific method, which is so contingent upon direct observation, and you can't observe God really or test things of this nature. So I'm definitely more sympathetic to like a sort of more mystical apophatic theology. There's a song I like where that one of the singer sort of starts. He goes off, like he sings the song, and then basically he ends by just repeating the phrase, "God is real. I'm not joking. I wouldn't joke about this. God is real." And it's like, it's very, I like it a lot. Because I can't honestly tell if this person is being sincere or not. But then I often ask myself, like, if I were asked the question and I wanted to be as correct, like as technically correct as possible, would I say that God exists? Right, because if I take this radical position where I can't assert anything about God, I can only sort of negate things about God. Would it be okay to say that God exists? And I think there's certainly a lot of ways people mean that.
Let me put this in the chat. Apophatic theology. Sorry, the spelling is a little weird. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've only ever seen it written, so I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it.
Good. Yeah.
But the idea that I think there is a sense in which you can say that God is real and God exists. But
I think so too. Yeah. That may be a starting point that they can at least agree upon that one thing. Like I do this sometimes. Like for example, it just might be the one exception. Like I had this assignment in my classes. This is a terrible analogy, but we'll go with it. Where I say like, if you're going to do this little reading, this writing assignment, it's got to be on the readings. But here's one exception: the very first assignment, because that we haven't had a reading yet. So it might be something like that. You know what I mean? Like where you have to at least say one thing about God.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, God doesn't not exist. That's a double negative. That's a positive. So. They may be willing to bite the bullet on that one and then just start their project of apophaticism from there.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good example because you have to start somewhere, and that's one of the reasons I believe in God is because sort of things exist, and for anything to exist at all, there has to be some grounding for it, some unconditioned reality. And that is what I identify with God, is this unconditioned reality.
Yeah.
And so I would say that exists, right? Like that's real in some sense. The phrasing I settled on is God isn't real, God is reality. But I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, that is consistent with a lot of early medieval, middle medieval thinkers. They would, especially early medieval, they had what's called the great chain of being, where like to be closer in proximity to God would be to be more real. to have more reality literally. And I say early medieval because they're working with Plato's philosophy of like the forms, and to approximate the forms, get an instance of a dog that approximates the form of dog most closely. Well, it's going to be more real than as opposed to like a pale imitation of a dog. So they applied this to like all of reality to be closer in proximity to God, in the Platonic language, the ultimate source and origin of all forms. Then that would actually be something that would have far more reality than something that was further away. And this is like, it's a very workable idea also, because this can also make sense of sin and why when someone sins, like you feel so kind of torn apart and apart from your creator and you're like disintegrated within yourself, kind of torn apart. So, it's a fascinating idea. I don't know if it's like ultimately true. There might be some truth in it. I don't know, but it's real fascinating.
No, I find that resonates very strongly with me. I think conceptualizing sin as like a kind of disorder, or like evil sort of broadly as a kind of like, it's not something that exists independently of good, but is like a deficiency of good.
Yes.
Been really, and another thing I wanted to bring up is I watched your stream on Monday about the three types of morality. I was a little late to it, so I missed the very beginning part. But I think that's a lot of the problems. A lot of people in America, at least, this is where I live. This is what I have the most experience with. Tend to view evil in this sort of like Manichaean way, where it's like it's an independent force. But that doesn't seem to me to cohere with the notion that God is, the three O's: omniscient, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. Like that's perfectly fine for the Manichaeans, like the original ones, because I believe assert that about God.
No.
But
well, they try. You seem like you're a big fan of Augustine. Have you done a lot of reading?
I read the Confessions when I was in college, and
such an amazing work of literature. It's so brilliant.
I majored in Latin as a college student, and so I've been meaning to like brush up on my Latin and go through it in the original Latin.
That would be great.
Because he's a very I think I like Saint Augustine. I don't necessarily always agree with everything he says, but I think him and I have a similar approach, and I think he's burdened like I feel a continuity with him, that like I feel burdened by the same questions that he was burdened by.
Well, once you become Catholic, that can be your patron saint, your confirmation saint there. So he's a brilliant guy. I mentioned earlier his view on freedom, free will, the classical view. You described earlier his view on sin, that is a privatio boni, if you know your Latin, a privation of good. And then what you were saying later, I think, I forget what the third thing was, but there's a lot of the Manichaean, obviously the connection. He if you know his bio, you already know this, but he dabbled in Manichaeanism and ultimately rejected it because it was an unworkable view of the divine. Like Manichaeans tried to have full omnipotent good God and full omnipotent bad God, but he's like, if you have that, very simply put, then you can't guarantee that good will win out in the end. Like you can't guarantee that, and that's a completely unjust cosmos worldview. And so he's just like on that, not on that ground alone, but like that was a real sinking point for him.
There's a lot, like I think questions of like polytheism are very interesting. Like are there so because I've expressed that I support this idea that there's like an unconditioned reality, a necessary being that grounds all of existence. And it's like the question, can there be multiple of these necessary beings, I think is a very interesting question. And it's like a sort of natural logical question. And I think my argument is that there cannot be a multiplicity of these necessary beings, because if there were two of them, say, then there has to be some element of them that's different so we can compare them. And if there's an element, exactly. And so I think
I love that argument, and you can continue if you want. I didn't mean to cut you off. It's a beautiful argument. It's the exact same argument Aquinas makes. So like in order
Yeah.
to prove that there can only be one God who is all perfect, right? Because if you had, there'd have to be a difference, and one of the differences, one is going to be better than the other, or lacking, it'd be less complete or less perfect. So, well, we are talking about the being that is most perfect and most exhibiting of all reality and all substance,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful argument. It's a
No,
really brilliant argument.
There's a video from back in April of 2020 that it was posted on YouTube, but there's this Muslim professor from I think he teaches at Augustana College, or he was at the time,
Cool.
named Keel Andani, who posted about Ibn Sina's argument for the existence
Yeah.
of God. But I went for a walk one day and I was listening to it in my headphones, and it was like night and day. I was like, this makes perfect sense. Like
That's awesome.
It was very unassailable, and that's one of the things he talks about is because I resonate very strongly with this argument, like, of the necessary being. We
definitely have a debt to the Muslim scholars. It obviously made an impact on you. That's really cool. I think I might have heard of that guy. That scholar. Ibn Sina I've heard of, but the guy you mentioned who was doing the YouTube thing. Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah. So I'm sympathetic to all these things. The question about the last guest asked about potentiality in God. Can God have any potentiality? And I find the argument that you made that, like, God can't have any potentiality because if he were potentially better, then he would change, and right. And that sort of introduced parts, and I don't like this notion of parts in God. And so like, and I think most of the problem, honestly, is like a linguistic problem. Like, we're trying to understand this entity that can't really be understood, and we're like sort of I had a mathematical education, and we did a lot of we talked a lot about modeling and like the philosophy behind modeling, where you're like, where it's, you're not gonna represent it perfectly, but it's good enough, and it's useful, right? And so that's kind of how I feel about a lot of this stuff. Like, I'm perfectly.
Yeah, that fascinates me because, like, with a mathematical mind, you could have easily gone the other way and been somebody who's like a staunch naturalist, materialist, atheist. You know, it's like, I don't believe in any of these supernatural. But then you said earlier, you're like, oh, I'm really like digging these mystics and stuff. Like, what is it for you that like makes that connection? That's super fascinating.
I'm not really sure, honestly, because it seems like those two things shouldn't cohere. Right. Like mathematics is all about, I think my mother is a biologist by training. And I think the fact that, like, in biology, everything is kind of, there's always asterisks attached to everything. There's always a caveat, right? Nothing is like, all living beings, say, have these criteria. Like, my partner is also a biologist, and I asked her, I'm working on this short story, and I asked her, hey, what's a definition of life? And she gave me like an hour-long lecture about this stuff. And it's like, exactly. And it was fascinating, and I really loved it. And so I think there's like that you have to, it's helped me a lot with my like personal mental health, but like being comfortable with not knowing, and sort of uncertainty. I find, and I like, that's I guess I'm just talking about the kinds of philosophy I like, but
well, that's the thing that Christians, and I don't know about other, maybe other denominations as well, but I'll just speak from being a Catholic, and having that real apostolic tradition, and throughout the centuries, and you see a lot of like rigorous philosophy and theology, but like there are always limits to like exploring the mysteries of God, like the Trinity and Jesus's full humanity and divinity and incarnation, like all that. You have to be, my wife says this all the time. She's like, you have to be comfortable with mystery if you're a Catholic, but that's also a really beautiful thing, you know?
Yeah, I think it adds, if everything were perfectly explainable, people wouldn't find it. People wouldn't think about these things for, thousands of years. Right. If and so I liked your discussion of morality on Monday. I'm very curious. I'm definitely gonna tune in for the trolley problem on
Cool.
next
Yeah,
week.
that's a massively popular topic. Like I mentioned earlier, like anytime I do that in class, people are always wanting to talk over past the time limit and past the
Yeah,
bell ringing sort of thing, and that's
yeah,
the one that like nobody is sleeping during that topic,
yeah,
and especially when now you've got memes. It's meme culture meets philosophy, and they're digging it. They're
yeah, yeah. You had said something on, and then we can wrap up. But you had said
Sure.
something on Monday that I found very insightful. Was that like you're talking about like the 3 levels of morality, and I'm in complete agreement that we need to. This is obviously the hardest part, but the bottom level, this root level
Yeah.
about what does it mean to be a good person? What are people for? I
Yeah.
think is the question we urgently need to get on the same page about. And I
Yeah.
think I would like some, like, because you can't make rules that are going to, it's like making definitions about things. You can't
Yeah.
cleanly divide actions into what's permissible and not, because there's so many edge cases. It's very difficult to come up with this comprehensive set of rules about it. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I like about Aristotelian ethics, or like virtue ethics, is that like you're striving for these things, but you don't. There's not. It's like a set of rules to follow.
Yeah, man. There's pros and cons of not being on the same page about the cons are obviously really visible, but one pro is like, if I know about the worldview, like I said in that video, that helps me to be way more informed about why people are disagreeing on certain issues. Like, I can like back it up and be like I did with Daniel, the objective ethics guy. Being like, well, the reason why you think this is because we disagree on this like more fundamental logically prior question, and that makes total sense. Like, if that is your worldview and you've decided this is the answer on your worldview, you're going to have to make certain concessions or make certain decisions later in those other choices, and it makes total sense. Yeah. So, well, man, all right, we're winding up here. Anything you want to?
I did want to mention to you.
Yeah.
That I hope my dad doesn't watch this before Christmas, but I got him that book you recommended from your colleagues, Dr. Little.
Oh yeah, that's great, man.
It was great. It was like surprisingly cheap too, so I got it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Great. Yeah, you know what's crazy is the founder of the Atlantic magazine. The Atlantic magazine is like this really brilliant, like awesome publication. It's been around for a good while now, but he was once with like the New Yorker, New York Mag, or whatever. He founded his own magazine. Great, brilliant guy. He apparently is a runner, and he featured her book in like one of his articles, like before other books. And it's like among like things you have to read if you're going to be a runner. So I'll have to find it and like. Yeah, and plop it in there. She shared it, and she's like, "Hey, did you know the founder of the Atlantic shared my book?" And that's super cool. Yeah,
right on. Yeah, no, it looks amazing. So I'm very excited.
Good. Yeah, I've not read it. She has not sent me a signed copy yet. I'm waiting on that maybe. But yeah, Brandon on this other book, he sent me a signed copy. I told him, I was like, "Dude, I don't want that book." And he's like, "I'll send you one." I was like, "You better sign it." So yeah. All right, man. Well, good to talk to you again. Good to see you. And
thank you very much.
God bless. I'll see you next time.
Yeah. Stay safe.
All right. See you. Bye. All right. Cool. So we good reminder. Anybody who wants to come on, of course, we'll bring on a good 20-minute time limit. If you have not watched that video from Monday, good reminder to go watch it. 3 Parts of Morality is the name of the video. Just our last live video. And then, of course, be here for the trolley problem. All right. I'm going to bring on our next guest. Thank you for being so patient, Bud. I will bring you in. And I don't know if we've met or not. So tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you want to talk about? Good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. No, I do remember you from last time. Okay, good. How are you doing? Yeah, I do hear you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm doing good. I actually have your video open.
You froze a little bit there.
The first 10 minutes like a coffee shop or something. I'm definitely going
to
be able to... Hello?
Okay, I think you're good.
I just hope my
internet
internet doesn't just crash out.
All right, good.
Yeah, no, I saw the first... Am I doing good?
Yeah, you're good now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's just a weird little time sync on my end, but let's see how long we can go through it. No, I definitely need to finish that video on your C.S. Lewis 3 Parts of Morality. what I wanted to ask you about, something that's been on my mind recently, I decided to revisit David Hume and his whole critique of like what exactly constitutes like moral motivation. Just kind of just seems kind of all come down to just sort of like sentiments and passions. Reason is and ought to always be the slave of the passions. And when I definitely see moral discourse, especially among atheists and theists, like doesn't really seem to be like the facts out there in the world don't really seem to have any justificatory force in grounding morality. All just unless there's like already an evaluative buy-in. So I'm just curious, like, how do we like how would you sort of understand this sort of like divide between reason and sort of like motivation and moral sort of and moral discourse?
Yeah, so you broke up twice there, so I'll try to patch together. Also, I'm working with confessed ignorance of Hume's view of moral motivation. So you want to give me, I knew you did a little bit of a breakdown there, but you want to provide more on that, and then maybe I have a more informed opinion on this.
Yeah, so of course, like Hume, he in his treatise, he develops this idea, what people just call like moral sentimental. That's not the right word. Moral sentimentalism, right? The only thing that actually, it's not any fact out there that motivates people to act on any sort of moral conviction. It's their own sort of feelings towards certain acts, things like disgust and praiseworthy. That's what ultimately always drives someone to act. And of course, he's famous for bringing out the is-ought gap. You can't really know where do you getting these oughts out in nature? It just seems all internal to sort of how you're evaluating things.
Okay.
Am I coming out too much, or is that pretty?
Twice. That's okay. Because I went ahead. You might have heard me typing. I on Gemini. I like Gemini better than ChatGPT because it's a Google search as well. But let me pull this up and I'll kind of walk you through what I'm thinking of this. Some of this is summary of what you've said already, but let me pull this up.
If you want to just like get the next guest while I try to figure out with my internet really quick,
you're the only guest right now. I think one or two dropped off. Actually, two dropped off. They just didn't want to wait. It looks like. Okay, so I asked this, and this seems consistent with what you were saying. For Hume, all motivation, including moral motivation, must ultimately originate in passions. Of course, sentiments or desires. That I don't know what I think about that. So that, I mean, I'm not quite sure. I mean, look, I guess as a Thomist, I confess I'm a Thomist. That there's a way of saying this truthfully, yet with, you got to make some caveats here. Like, obviously it's not grounded completely naturalistically in your passions. Obviously it's got to be something, but that God could possibly work through your passion. That's just the natural order of how moral motivation works. That's totally open to possibility. That would be my thought here. Yeah. But of course Hume's going to reject that. He thinks like he has a work on natural religion or something like that as well. So he's going to reject that account. So that's where he and I would disagree, but I might agree with him. But now it just becomes a datum. Yes, we can find moral motivation in our passions, but then I'd press him probably on like, well, doesn't that make it arbitrary? I mean, I'm sure he's got defenses for that. He's a brilliant philosopher, But then I'd say, well, to me that seems make us arbitrary. But if you have God designing and ordering those passions and making them rightly ordered or disordered, then that can be a good guide or bad guide towards more motivation. But anyway, that's just my initial thoughts.
Geez, what was I going to say? So what I'm worried about, right, is I don't want to turn morality into these weird abstracted rules. Like, I don't want people to like have to say something is wrong by having to go study Kant, right? I think like I think we're perfectly equipped for living a good life, and when people try to articulate why something is wrong, they really can't give a good reason for it, because the most immediate, it seems intuitive, right? Like, I know it's wrong, right? It's just this sort of like very brute feeling, and when you try to reach for any sort of thing outside view like, oh, it's if you try to reach for any sort of fact in the matter, it just seems like those seem to like get away from our lived experience. Those facts out there in the world don't really seem to be completely identified with that brute intuition that no, this is wrong.
That totally makes it. Yeah. So here's how I would frame it. And this is how I teach it. I think moral intuitions are a good guide. I just call them moral intuitions. You might say passion, sentiments, whatever. But we might be hitting upon the same thing. But when I say moral intuitions, like I have the moral intuition, for example, that helping an old lady cross the street is a good thing, generally speaking. And, slapping a baby in the face, generally speaking, is a bad thing. Like even if we don't have laws for or against those things, that's the moral intuition tells me this or that. And I tell students, like, some moral intuitions you walk in the door with are going to be really deep-seated and deeply held, and you should never let go of them, like Holocaust bad, slavery bad, those sorts of things. Like, but there's some moral intuitions you're going to have to give up, like, because you're going to realize upon reflection that, oh, maybe I was wrong about that. And this is where, like, the role of reason comes in, right? So these moral intuitions are going to be good initial guides, and when they're rightly, properly trained. And why is it that having a deep-seated moral intuition like Holocaust bad is a good guide? Well, could be because culture and society enforces that, and like we've seen so many bad instances of that. Like it's been repeated to maybe one day, maybe sooner rather than later, we might eventually realize that maybe it wasn't so bad, and we have to reinforce that intuition again. But but right now everybody's in agreement about it. That's why it's so deeply seated. But yeah, I think at that point, like, these are fallible, but can be a good guide when they're rightly ordered or highly reinforced by a moral society. But then, like, where you need to revise them, that's where the role of reason and moral thinking come into play. That's what I'd say.
One of the I like the Aristotelian account, and I like how most of them, like how virtue ethics, it seems pretty much all these guys refer to some sort of theory of function, that humans are sort of have some sort of natural end. And where I think that plays in, I guess, like, I'm a much more naturalistic thinker. Generally, what does a theory of function look like? Like, how would you define the function of an organism, or or of a human being? Just from, and I guess you might do it differently, since I only have sort of like a.
Yeah, I will be doing a video on this in like probably 4 or 5 weeks on this. Because we'll eventually get to virtue ethics, but I've got to get through the other theories first, just as what I teach in class. And when I get to that section of Nicomachean Ethics where he says that the virtue of a thing lies in its function, or dependent upon its function, like I pause there and I'm like, let's unpack this, because that sounds gobbledygook. What the heck are you saying? So function, obviously artifacts can have function, like knives, machines, that sort of thing. They are function. They have a purpose for which they're used, or they have some role that they play. That's often what philosophy means by function, is some role that they play. But for natural kinds, like human organisms and plants and animals and so on, it's kind of weird to talk, especially as a naturalist, to talk about function. You know what I mean? Like, because like it's weird, because then you have to have account of natural kinds. And so many people in recent times, they're just like, oh, well, there are no natural kinds and there are no function, right? And so now this seems really foreign to us. But yeah, so function would just be like its role. So that the function of plants, for example, is, or let's say all living things, would be the life and nutrition and growth. The function of animals would be, in addition to that, sensory life and movement, right? Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, humans have all that, but they also have, most specifically as their function, exclusive to all other things that are like them, they also have the life of reason. And he says, like, the function of human beings is a life, he says, consistent with reason, or at least not apart from reason, or activity of the soul. This is what he says: activity of the soul, consistent with reason, or at least not apart from reason. And that can encompass so many things. Like, it's not just doing math work. It's like you can cook a dinner, and like that can engage your reason somehow, And so, but like, it's got to be something that's like proper. Philosophers say the properly human, proper to humans is going to be the reason. That's going to be the human function. So it's hard to use these terms in generalities, terms like functions, but I don't know if that helps to unpack what a function is. If you were to ask me to give a definition of function, I'd be like, I don't know.
I think the problem with sort of the naturalistic view, as it's sort of talked about in like popular philosophy, is that it doesn't properly take into account like the role of human experience in sort of how it's like how it's embedded in the world around us. Obviously, like most of the like naturalistic accounts, evolutionary accounts of function, I don't think they're really satisfactory, right? But like the biggest one out there is this idea called the selective effects account of function. Basically, the function of a heart or a limb is just whatever was selected for in the past for that allowed the organism to survive. Yeah. Like just on the face, maybe more to that, but on the face of it, it seems like something's like being left out of that account. It doesn't really seem like it's really grounding all the things we would hope to describe function as.
Yeah. And it sounds like
it seems like you can't make an objective account of function because function. Yeah, it seems function is fully realized in the way we experience the function of organism, and we don't have a good way of talking about how experience fits into the natural world yet, I don't think.
Yeah, you do have to do a bit of this like revisionism. I take it as like since natural kinds aren't real, a naturalist would argue, then you've got to, if you're going to see a function as like a workable concept in philosophy or in science, then you got to figure it out somehow. And so, yeah, that totally makes sense. At least they're in some ways, in some instances in context, they haven't done away fully with function because it just is. I wish they hadn't done fully away with like the final cause, the telos either, but yeah.
Well, there is a kind of like a niche movement in philosophy. I think I talked about it last time, the whole enactivist movement, which wants to say, has this whole critique of materialism, saying that it's this whole reification of our scientific practices, and we have to kind of, in order to account for things like natural teleology, we have to sort of have a good account of how experience is placed in the natural world. But I'm curious how that segues into other things. I know, like, how does like the problem of universals in particular sort of play into this whole thing, right? You talked about like natural kinds and all that.
Yeah, I mean, so transcendental is only going to be something that's possessed by all things in reality, like all substances. Let's say they share in common this one thing. So the first and most fundamental transcendental is going to be being. All things that exist in reality have being, so they're going to share in that. And then other ones that have been proposed, like from Plato, Aristotle onward, are things like goodness, truth, and I think Aquinas eventually proposes beauty. All things have existence, they have being, they also have goodness, they also have truth, and so on and so forth. So as far as natural kinds, I don't know, they wouldn't be transcendentals because they aren't things possessed by all beings, but they would be a class of things in which every being in that class that is shared by all those beings in that class. So that would just be the kind of limitation there. But yeah. And of course, all those things would have truth, goodness, beauty, and being, and so on.
I don't know if I cut out, or maybe those things are too related. But like, so what's the relationship between like universals and transcendentals?
Got you. Okay, so you said I thought you said transcendentals. Yeah, universals. Yeah. Yeah, I'm less clear on those. I mean, yeah, so a universal would just be not something held by all things in existence. It would be something that is a general property that can be shared among many particulars, right? So, yeah, I mean, I guess you have to have an account, and this is why, like, older philosophers throughout history, like earlier philosophers in history, they're not going to have a problem with these because they're not afraid of that metaphysics, like that real robust metaphysics. Like in recent years, like 20th century, you're going to see like a movement and push towards like metaphysics light, or maybe epistemology first as opposed to metaphysics first philosophy. Yeah, so
it's all Descartes' fault.
Yeah, and so you're not going to see many people being very comfortable with using things like natural kinds because of that, because that was earlier commitments to epistemology, and then realizing that maybe the workability of these universals, like what is a universal anyway, yeah. I
wonder. So I have like kind of like a kind of idea of kind of the direction I want to go, but I'm curious, like just like sure. Like prima facie, what do you think some of the problems are, or what do you think? So like, who else sort of talks about it. So like I have this idea that, so like I'm gonna call it like bathtub metaphysics, you know. So you have a big old bathtub. What happens if you pull the drain plug?
What do you mean if like you don't do any metaphysical reasoning whatsoever?
No, this is like my analogy, right? So
okay.
If you have a big bathtub with water, you
I see. Oh, okay. So yeah, they all swirl down the drain.
Yeah, there's a whirlpool forms, right?
Yeah.
If I have a huge bathtub, so if I have a huge bathtub and I have two drain plugs at either end, I pull both of them. What's going to happen?
You would have like dual whirlpools. Yeah.
You have two whirlpools. So you see kind of like, so these individual whirlpools are only possible because they fit within the overall dynamics and structure of the overall bathtub. And I kind of want to do the same thing there. Like we have the natural world is this big thing in process, but individuals emerge out of that because of how they individuate themselves by the sort of particular processes that are happening in their local environment. So like you have, so it's kind of like, it's almost like Spinoza's like substance and modes, you know. They're all like modes they're all different modes of the sort of same substance. That's kind of like how I would sort of account for the particulars and universals in a sort of a natural world. But I don't know what sort of challenges that sort of idea might run into.
Yeah, I'd have to hear more about the analogy and the examples and stuff. But yeah, I think you might be onto something there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wish my my time for the internet was a lot better, but
yeah, that's all right.
I think I'll do some more reading. Hopefully,
okay.
I'll have some more pointed questions next time. But no,
great.
It's always cool to see you on here.
That's all right. Yeah, absolutely, and it's always great to have you on here. And I'm really happy to see you anytime. So sorry I didn't recognize you at first. I just saw the name and I was like, I don't know. And then yeah, of course I remembered you once you got on. So all right, well, good to see you, and I'll talk to you next time.
Next time, man.
All right, see ya. All right, cool. So that was Bud. I have time for one more. Normally, I would just end it here, but I see you've been sitting there waiting, Eastern Thomas, and it's always really pleasant to talk to you. So I'm going to bring you on, and what do you want to talk about?
Hey, how you doing? Going? Well, being the Thomist, I'll probably steer this a little bit in more of a theological direction.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so I understand St. Thomas, you know, he has multiple ways of interpreting Scripture. You have the senses of Scripture. You've got the anagogical sense.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the typological sense. You've got all these different senses. Specifically, when it comes to the typological sense, I think it's also called the allegorical sense, despite, you know, depending on which Thomistic commentator you read. How far does that necessarily go? Because I know St. Thomas does say in his work that, you know, the literal sense of Scripture kind of has to be the bedrock of every interpretation of Scripture out there. And I know, especially when you go back to the beginning, when you get to Genesis, obviously there's a lot of debate over, you know, what in Genesis is, you know, literal. Is it a 6,000 years? You know, does evolution play a role? What is the Big Bang Theory? What role does that play? You know, I know St. Thomas specifically says in his commentary that he does not interpret the 6 day or the 6 days of creation to actually be like 24-hour days.
Yeah. Augustine doesn't either.
Right. But also, I mean, obviously things like evolution or debate over the 6,000 years, that didn't really come until much later after St. Thomas's time. So when you weigh that against the literal sense, you know, how far would the typological sense go in that regard? Would it go to a point where you could say, oh, you know, maybe it wasn't actually 6,000 years, or maybe, you know, you can factor in evolution, but you know, that still has to be understood as just, you know, certain allegories being put in there, like, or certain hyperbolic language, like in the book of Isaiah, where you have a literal message, but there's a lot of metaphysical, mystical language. Or would his model kind of exclude something like,
Yeah.
And over 6,000 years.
Yeah. Okay. So I highly fascinated question. I would jump right in on it. But first, I have to share that I love Thomas so much, St. Thomas Aquinas. They have this little chaplet of his. Actually, I've given it to my son. I appreciate it so much. It's just a little chaplet, 9 beads, as one does. It's got a little image of him and a cross on one end. And it's been blessed. It's been touched to the actual major relic of St. Thomas Aquinas when I visited here in Baltimore, the skull, almost a year ago now, in December. It was the actual skull of Thomas Aquinas straight from Toulouse, France. And
wow.
yeah, it's such an amazing thing. We know it was his skull because he was buried there in Toulouse within 50 years of, they excavated his body within 50 years of his death. So they knew exactly where he was. So, and he was held in high esteem. So all that to say, there are those 4 senses of Scripture. I always forget what the 4th one is. It's going to be literal, allegorical, moral, and then there's one weird one.
Anagogical.
Anagogical, yeah. And it's hard to understand. I think that's like the spiritual meaning. So moral, spiritual, allegorical, literal. Now, and it makes sense. Like, so Aquinas is going to have a method here. And probably, if I were to guess, I've not read him in this area. Right now I'm working my way through the Prima Secundae questions in the very beginning. Like I've gotten through question 1, I'm on question 2, and it's on beatitude. And like anytime you want to read Thomas, it's like it takes a lot of time. And so, but I've not read him on this. There's a lot of stuff I hadn't read him on. But I would guess that he's going to have a method, and he might have like, okay, it's almost like a decision tree. Okay, if it's literal, do this. If it's allegorical, do. But he might start with figure out if it's literal or not, right? And there might be notable kind of identifiable reasons why you shouldn't take it literal, right? Like, for example, like apocalyptic descriptions in Revelation or in Daniel might not be literal. Or when he's describing, the creation using 6 days, he's relying upon Augustine probably, because Augustine said it, 800 years before him or so, and said, well, I don't take this literally. So he already probably has his doubts that the Genesis creation account is not literal. So given that, well, it's got to be one of the other ones. But you can also think of like literal in a different sense also, right? So like if your only other options are an allegory, remember what an allegory is. It's like, well, think of like a dream, like Joseph's dream. Like, well, the wheat bowing down to the one stalk of wheat. The wheat represents the brothers, and the big stalk of wheat represents Joseph. Like, that's an allegory. There's no literal translation or interpretation to be had. So we can't say that Genesis creation story is not literal at all. Like, this is why I often distinguish between like rigid or wooden literalism and other kinds of like straight reading of the Scripture. In other words, like those things did happen, but perhaps the time differences are not. Like, let's say the events did happen, but maybe the word day is not being used in a literal sense. You'd have to break it apart by the account versus the words being used and so on. Because it's certainly not a completely allegorical like a dream. It's not just for moral teaching, not just for spiritual teaching. It is meant to be taken literally, but the elements inside it, like the day, is not necessarily meant to be taken literally. So that's probably how I think he would probably try to approach that.
Yeah, because I know, I know one of the arguments a lot of people will make is they'll try to say, like, some throughout St. Thomas's writing, he does say, the literal sense is the guiding sense of Scripture throughout, all of the Scriptures. But there's also a lot of caveats to that. Like he wouldn't say like he would say something like if somebody said Sally was so hungry she ate a horse. Like, obviously Sally isn't, doesn't feel like she could eat a horse, but there's still a literal meaning in that, in the sense that Sally is literally extremely hungry.
And she literally ate something.
Right, she literally ate something. And so
horse is going to not... Yeah, so the account there is going to be taken literally overall, like the message that you're trying to convey. But the horse, the word is not meant to be taken literally. Yeah.
Right.
So they literally happen, what we're describing, like that is a fact of history, but the details may not be literal exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know that. I know that a lot of people have made that argument, and that's kind of how they balance kind of Genesis with the literal sense, as they try to say, they take St. Thomas's framework and they'll say, okay, maybe there was kind of a literal framework in the sense that this happened in a sense, but there's a lot of hyperbole and, there's a lot of kind of mystical and spiritual language that's used, probably to appeal to, the reader at the time as well,
Perhaps, yeah. Exactly. You have to think like a historian. I always say, the ancient peoples, like, if you just think of like New Testament biographies or like biographies in history around the time of the New Testament, like atheists want to all the time complain that, well, the Gospels don't read like a biography or an account. It's like, well, do you know your first century literature? Because nothing reads like a modern day biography,
right.
So like, what are you doing? So what appeals to earlier peoples in ancient times and antiquity and even medieval period, they're just not going to be the same.
Right. Yeah.
And so they may be digging this whole, like, if you were to give them like oh my gosh, if you were to time travel and give somebody a scientific journal article written like really rigorously and like worked out, and like these were x equals this, y equals this, the x-axis, here's our data, here's our subplot and all this, and like here's what these all means, here's our findings, and be like, here, I'm sharing now, they would think you're an alien because they don't care about what's literal necessarily, but they want to convey meaning and accounts of what happened, but they may use different language to do that and different concepts to do that. Yeah. They just had different priorities and things that they were interested in.
Right. And I know, obviously, he lived, thousands of years before, or not thousands of years, but he lived hundreds of years before St. John Henry Newman. But, St. Thomas does kind of have this sort of prototype model of St. John's doctrinal development. I mean, even though he doesn't use that same comprehensive model, he does, a lot of those ideas are in St. Thomas, which is the idea that God kind of gradually reveals things based on man's ability to comprehend it. Because obviously, the idea of St. Thomas is, there's the famous quote, grace does not destroy nature, it perfects nature. And so obviously God is going to reveal things according to the nature and the understanding of a person. And so you could make that argument, I think, about Genesis as well. Because I mean, like, for example, in the book of Isaiah, when it's talking about the suffering servant, now we understand that that's Christ. If it had said, this person named Jesus is going to come and he's going to be crucified on a cross, well, then, history would not have played out the way that God intended.
Yeah, everybody would be naming their child Jesus at that point.
Right, exactly.
Like, in order to be the one, it is. It's a real grace and mercy from God that he would encode it for the people who could understand it at the time it was given. Like, and it's a little frustrating for us moderns to be like, well, that didn't make sense to us. But, I just had this thought, like, we like to understand that let's just take not just throughout history, but just in the world now. We know that there are different peoples, different languages, different traditions and cultures that all understand things in a different sense and so on. But like, it seems weird that we don't take that same generosity and understanding and apply it to history. We were like, no, you have to think like a rigorous scientist, or you have to give me medical records of Jesus's death. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just like, where's the charity and generosity and patience? You know what I mean? Like, that you're showing nowadays, you're just not being a good critical thinker either.
Right. Yeah, I get that, and I think in Genesis, I think there's areas where it's obviously, well, I mean, I think the whole thing, if you use St. Thomas's model, you would have to say it's literal but hyperbolic. But I think you can identify some areas where there's kind of this literal idea, and then other areas where there's more of a hyperbolic sense. Like you could argue maybe like with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you could say maybe that's idolatry, because like maybe that's hyperbole for idolatry, because they're not denoting truth to the supreme good, they're denoting truth unto themselves, or something like that. I mean, you could, you know.
Yeah. There's all different ways. Like, yeah, I mean, and just take the Tower of Babel, you know, for example, another Genesis story. You know, was there a real tower? You know, maybe there was, you know, and maybe that's a literal story in that sense, but like, you know, maybe there were different nations and peoples who were trying to build something, actual construction project, or maybe there wasn't. You know, we don't really know. Or about the Nephilim, you know, the Nephilim that like what intermarried and bred with the sons of what was Adam or Noah or something like that. And it's like, you know, a lot of people, like a lot of History Channel people, they're like, oh, you know, that Nephilim, those are giants, you know.
Right,
and
right.
Like, it's a crazy conspiracy stories. It's like because people don't, they can take it too far, right? And this is why being a Catholic is so such a relief in my sense. Such a relief in some sense as well to me. Is like I don't have to figure these things out on my own. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sitting there like some conspiracy theorist with a tinfoil hat on thinking, oh, well, this is what this means. This is what this means. It's like we have the benefit of a real wonderful and beautiful and robust tradition and faith and great philosophers and theologians who have worked all this stuff out for us. And sure, they don't agree on everything, but like they have done the work for us that like no single man could do all by himself, maybe unless you're Thomas Aquinas because he did so much, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and I know, you know, even if you go back to many of the church fathers, even at that time, do tend to take a, you know, hyperbolic interpretation of certain parts of Genesis. Like I think it was St. Augustine who said that in the book of Genesis where you have Sodom and Gomorrah and it says the woman looked away and she turned into salt. Like he didn't take that to literally mean, oh, she turned into salt. He kind of took that to mean like, oh, she had regret. And that was hyperbolic language. And like, I think Pope St. Gregory the First also, I think he taught that, you know, when it says, you know, I think God wrestled with Jacob and he won, and Jacob won. Like he took that to mean not, well, they got into a boxing ring and they fought each other. He took that to mean like, oh, he struggled with the mysteries and the wonder of God. And then he came out and he was, you know, he merited a reward because of that. Was essentially how Pope St. Gregory, I think, took that.
That's awesome. Yeah, we can come away from these accounts that are really puzzling to us. They could come away with at least knowing that, okay, something happened, right? And this is why they wrote an account, right? So like take, what was the example you just gave? Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife, turning back to look, right? We can gather, and this is what critical text historians do, by the way, textual critical historians. They say, what is the non-mystical elements here? And try to kind of do surgery and triage and kind of repair the text in some way. But like, even as a believer, you can think like, if you're thinking through these different senses of scripture, what literally happened, probably what literally happened is something happened. There was an account. Probably she did look back or at least have an urge or a yearning towards what was lost, right? Like that's worth telling about, right? And there might be these details that are kind of put in different flowery language or somewhat, right? This reminds me, by the way, of alchemy, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, alchemy, a lot of people like to poo-poo on this and be like, oh, at least we're smarter than that now. We're not alchemists. How stupid and foolish that was. Well, if you think about and learn about the history of alchemy, right? If you read the actual text and try to perform and like redo the actual experiments, you can actually do them. Like you can do them, except so there's a guy here at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Like you wouldn't think, and I tell my students this, like I was like, you wouldn't think there's a guy at Johns Hopkins University down the road who, you know, is doing alchemy experiments, right? And they're like, no, of course not. And it's like, yeah, well, meet Lawrence Principi, you know, or Princip, or however you say his name. Like he's a guy, he's a historian of science. He's recreating the experiments, and he's realizing that what they were doing, it's like a proto chemistry. They are actually observing and recording what they're seeing, but they're doing it in like magical sort of mystical language. Like, okay, this what we understand is just like a gold kind of leaf structure. You know, it looks like fool's gold, whatever it is. What structure, mineral structure, develops out of this chemical reaction? They will describe as something like the dragon's chamber opened and out came the dragon, or some mystical, magical language or something like that, right? But like what is core and central to that account is that something happened and it resembles whatever it is we're trying to describe in this mystical language. And by the way, alchemy is also great for another reason, because I think I just recently learned this. The whole purpose of trying to turn something into gold is to secure gold as a monetary currency. Because if you can prove that you cannot turn lead into gold, then you have secured the value of gold. Like this was a really meritorious and worthy endeavor to try to show that you can't do it. So like I said, people like to poo-poo on that and be like, oh, there's no value in that. Good thing we don't do magic anymore. And it's like you got to think like a historian. You just got to be fair to what you're seeing in history. And there are real things that happened, and they're going to use different language to describe it. That's just being fair. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know too, there's also, St. Thomas talks about symbols of faith. I know he talks about, this is an unrelated topic, but I think you could kind of tie it together. The divine names, which is the idea that God presents himself in a certain manner that is appealing to, the human intellect. I mean, like even the name God, is in many ways kind of identified or granted because, you had many pagans at the time who said, oh, this is my God and this is my God. And so it was supposed to kind of say, oh, there's this dominion over the other gods. And you kind of get that too with, some of the animal sacrifices where it was, oh, yeah, all these other people are having human sacrifices. We're going to have animal sacrifices, and that's going to prefigure Christ's sacrifice on the cross. But all that type of stuff too. I think that you could say in the same way that God uses certain symbols and kind of applies that to the literal sense to kind of sort of, make that appealing to the human intellect.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it just goes to show, we're running out of time here, but and I'll let you have the last word. So I think it goes to show the beauty of the faith is that it's not made just for one person. Like you can be a heady intellectual who is like maybe even on an autism spectrum, and like you only like computer programmer, like you only care about things being all your ducks in order, things being rightly like makes sense logically speaking. That's not just what the faith is. We have that to offer, but we also have this mystical aspect of it. We have all this mystery in certain doctrines like the Trinity and Christ's incarnation and so on. So like there's something for everyone, and there's practical things for everyone too, like certain orders of priests and sisters focus on evangelism, certain focus on preaching, certain focus on giving to the poor, certain focus on education. Like it's all different things that way. And it's just a beautiful faith, and it's like I've grown to really love it. But anyway, final thoughts here, and then we'll wrap up our stream.
Yeah, and I would say too, I know one of the arguments that St. Thomas makes is that, the different styles that you see in Scripture are also kind of a way of showing that in spite of these different styles and the different natures of the authors and the different senses of the authors, there's still this cohesive narrative. Like St. Thomas basically says God specifically has, St. Luke speak differently from, Isaiah, because he wants he wants to show that, okay, they can say two completely different things, but they're still saying the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. Again, like it perfects nature. It doesn't erase nature. Yeah.
Right.
It preserves the specific humanity of each individual author. And that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, thanks for calling in, and it
was a pleasure.
You're welcome anytime. So
Thank you
I
so
appreciate
much.
you. Yeah, of course. All right, we'll see you next time.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Cool. So we're wrapping up here, and I'll just answer a couple things in the chat. My wife said, speaking of dinner, it's ready when you are. I'm ready soon. Just give me a couple of minutes to wrap up. And then Ace asked, What are we having tonight? Rib, salad, rice. And then he says chicken masala, pan, butter chicken, so on. It's so, or naan, right? It's so crazy you mentioned that. It makes me wonder if you have listening devices in my home, because we have in our fridge leftovers of both short rib and chicken tikka masala. And it's like, dude, of all the things you could have guessed, and you guessed those things, it really makes me wonder if you've got listening devices in my house, Ace Trades. So, all right. Yeah, good to see you, Tinker Tim. Yeah, if you're here earlier on, it's every Wednesday. There's no topic. It's just open topic as you read in the description of this video. And you guys get to decide the topic. We're wrapping up here, but next Wednesday, be here. It's usually 4:30 to 7 p.m. Eastern. And you pick the topic. And I give a list of topics that many people have called in and talked about. So that gives you kind of an idea. And of course, any of the stuff you've seen on the channel, if you have seen stuff, that's totally fair game as well. And really just anything on your mind. Like I've also like certain people like will call in and be like, hey, give me advice on becoming a philosopher or educational. Cause I spent 15 years in college. I mean, it's a long time. So I've got a little bit of advice on that too, or something. You want to shoot the wind or whatever. Yeah. Good to see you as well. Yeah. Thanks for doing what you do. God bless you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Love to call in next week, get clarity on the meaning of deity, worship, and Catholicism. I'm happy to do that. It's wonderful. And Mary says here, another brother of mine, because she mentioned earlier she had a brother who had questions about, it's actually the very first comment in the stream. She posted it even before we jumped on the stream. She's very, very diligent about these. Says the Bible says Israel will be attacked by the bear of the north, and this is obviously Russia. He's Protestant. Any ideas where to start with him? Yeah, it does go back to what we were just discussing about Bible interpretation. And I'm grateful as a Catholic to not have to worry. Like Protestants, they think they have an advantage here. They're like, yeah, well, the Holy Spirit speaks directly towards individual human beings. But like, well, can the Holy Spirit be wrong? No. But yet human beings can differ between one another. So clearly there's something going on that puts people in error. It's not just, hey, the Holy Spirit does it and now everybody's right about everything. No. So that's a disadvantage. Like they are right to a degree that the Holy Spirit does speak and help to interpret. But I think as a Catholic, you have an advantage here to say, I don't have to figure out all this on my own. Like there are really wonderful, wonderful, great resources in our Catholic faith and tradition that help to interpret certain things like in Revelation or in Daniel or wherever the Bible says this. I'm not even sure if the Bible says this. Actually, I've never heard this claim, to be honest with you, the bear of the north, because again, you're thinking ancient Near East, and they had lions, like Barbary lions. They had camels, they had deer, but like as far as bear, I'm not sure. Like I'd have to look at a map or history to know if or like you can actually do this if you really wanted to know, Mary. Just there are gratefully and thankfully there are now concordances and Bible study materials all over the internet for free. And you can just look up or Bible commentaries all over for free. Like when, back in the day before the internet, like if you didn't have it in your library, if you couldn't get it from the library, you really just kind of had to go with whatever, or maybe ask somebody to borrow their copy or whatever. There weren't that many resources to go around, but now wonderfully, we have the internet. You can find, let's see, Bible, concordance right here. So let's actually go here, and then we're going to wrap up soon, but I want to show you this real quick. So if I go here, if I just Google Bible concordance, and I don't want to buy one, I don't want a hard copy, I want something online, right? Of course, Strong's it's an okay one, there's some problems with it. But right here, concordanceBibleStudyTools.com, use free online, and you can just search. All right, it wants me to take my ads off, whatever, dude. Fine. No, I'm not going to do that. Whatever. It takes too long. The King's Bible Concordance. Bible word or verse. Let's go here. I'm going to search for a bear. Are there any instances of bear? Okay, greater than I can bear. Okay, cool. But what about the animal? And I would just start here. Like, Does your half-brother mean somewhere in Revelation? I'd go towards the end here, Revelation. Okay, cool. Has the feet of a bear and the mouth of whatever, right? You'd have to limit out all these, cannot bear this, cannot bear that, cannot bear witness, whatever. That seems like Revelation 13:2, maybe that's what he's referring to. Maybe Daniel. You'd have to go to the middle of these results. They look like they're in order here. But yeah, this talks about the feet of a bear. I don't see anything, and I'd have to read the context about the north, but that's how I would approach this, like trying to maybe go to sources and try to think about what the text actually says. But then at the end of the day, like, trying to read any apocalyptic literature, there are different genres in the Bible. Obviously, there are gospels, there are letters, epistles, there's wisdom literatures, there's prophecy, and there's apocalyptic literature, history, and so on. So if you read apocalyptic literature, it's always a trouble. This is why, like, if anybody wants to talk to me, like, I used to be into like Last Times and Revelation, and when all those books came out, 25 years ago about what is it called, Left Behind books, and they had the movie or movies, the Left Behind series, right? I was such a fan, and then I realized after a while, I'm like, crap, this is not the only theory about the end times. Oh, crap. And I started realizing that in college, and I'm like, I can't just build my whole entire theology on this, plus the idea that none of this stuff has happened yet. And then I realized you're trying to predict how prophecy will go in the future, and think about how wrong they got prophecy in the New Testament, thinking back to the Old Testament prophecies. It's like it's a fool's errand to try to make sense of Revelation, especially on your own. So that's where I would start. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, he says, reminder, brother, that the Bible says Israel was attacked from the north, namely Assyria, and the Assyrian captivity and diaspora resulted. That's true, yeah. And so a lot of historians, if they're going to, like, this is out of my wheelhouse. I don't do Bible interpretation. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a Bible scholar in any sense of the word, or historian, especially with this era. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This would be what I would look for. Like, what do historians say when they read certain scriptures like that? And it will usually be in reference to something that may have already happened in history. And this is a really good instance of that. I don't know my history, but yeah, that would be a really good instance, a good thing to look at. Yeah. And Gordon, thanks for mentioning that. And if you happen to have a historian that, the name of one, that backs this theory, or the name of a theory that says this, it'd be helpful. But also, Mary, if you're thinking like, oh, I want to remember this, it's like, that's why I was like, have a touch point, like a name or a theory name or something like that. You could just put this into Google. In Google, like ChatGPT, or into Gemini, which is Google's AI. I like to use Gemini. And I would just, actually, let me do that now. This is such a good example. I'll have to go to the video here. Let me go here now. I got to copy and paste it first. And I'll just do this exercise with you, and then I'll have to get off because my wife wants to eat. But if we go back here and we go and share this tab instead, and I ask Gemini, I say, look, someone said that in the Bible, the bear from the north means Russia. But I heard a theory that says, boom, and then make that copy and paste, that says Israel was attacked from the north, named Assyria, the Assyrian captivity and diaspora resulted. What? And then just ask a question like, what else can you tell me about this? Let's say someone call him Joe. And then say down here, is Joe right? Or is this theory I heard right? And then boom, and it'll give you results. Like AI, the best thing about AI is like, you need to know how to so bear from the north and Russia, Joe's view, right? We'll get into this. Like I'll actually scroll this real shortly, and this, when the video posts this live stream, you can just go back and pause it, because if you put a different question, you might get a differently worded thing. So I'll have this, the bear symbolism, while the Bible doesn't explicitly call the nation a bear, blah 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 blah. And I'll scroll. It says this is a common conclusion, though debated modern interpretation, but that's the thing. That's a problem with prophecy. And then second theory you hold or heard, blah, 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 blah. And it gives you the theory, a premillennialist theory. Okay. And it gives you a whole thing here. And this way in the video, you can just go back later and pause it and read this as you go. Okay. And it gives you this nice little summary chart right here. Blah, 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 blah. So and then I think that's it. Oh, and it gives us a video. Cool. And I guess you'd have to look up the video on your own. Like, just search that title, Ezekiel's Word. Who is Gog from Magog? There you go. All right, so hope that was helpful. And then I'll pull that down forever. Okay, cool. Yeah, and not a problem. Yeah, sorry to hold you on, but thanks so much. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, and I think AI is super helpful when you know how to ask it something. Like I tell students, like you put slop in, you're going to get slop out. But if you know how to ask it questions and be like, hey, here's something, resolve it for me. What else can you tell me about this, and fill in the gaps of my understanding? Then like it is really helpful for that. I know a lot of professors who use it to refine their own ideas because they know already what they're talking about, and then they get to they get better understanding of their own ideas. So yeah. All right, cool, awesome, very helpful. Yeah, I'm happy to help that. So all right, guys, that's it for us today. And I look forward to seeing you on Monday when we talk about the trolley problem. Don't forget, and make sure to be there. And I'll see you then. God bless and take care. Bye-bye.